Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I've been lying awake for hours, staring at the corner of my bedroom where the light never reaches. I hear something there. It calls my name. It waits until I switch off the lamp and then it starts. I've tried ignoring it, but it knows every secret I've ever kept. I don't understand how that's possible, and I've stopped trying to rationalize it. I just know that the voice is real, and it won't leave me alone. I first noticed it about 3 months ago. I was in bed, drifting between consciousness and sleep, when I heard the faintest sound. It reminded me of air escaping through a crack in the wall. I opened my eyes, and that's when I heard my name, plain as day. I remember shooting up in bed and checking my phone for the time. It was 2:17 a.m. My heart was racing and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to be behind me. I got out of bed, walked to the door, flipped the light switch, and scanned every inch of the room. I saw nothing. I couldn't explain the voice, so I told myself I was just tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned off the light and lay back down, but the whisper returned as soon as my head hit the pillow. Since then, it's only gotten worse. I can't sleep with the lights on because the bright glare keeps me awake, and I can't sleep with them off because the whisper grows louder. It feels like a lose-lose situation. Most nights, I lie awake until dawn. The second the sunlight streams through the window, the whisper fades, but it never disappears entirely. Even during the day, I feel something behind me. I catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. I hear my floor creak as if someone's walking around when I'm alone in the house. Whenever I check, there's no one there. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. The hallways smell like stale tobacco, and the floors squeak under every step. My place isn't much bigger than a couple of cramped rooms, so it's impossible to hide or run far. Each morning I shower, make coffee, and try to go about my routine. But I keep looking around, expecting to see a dark figure in the corners. Sometimes I hear that voice in the kitchen or the living room, whispering so low that I can barely catch the words. I know the voice is talking about me. It mentions details of my life that I've never shared with anyone. It repeats secrets from my past that I hate remembering. I started leaving the TV on for background noise. I hoped that any random dialogue would drown out the whisper. It doesn't help. I can still hear it, even over the television. Some nights, I put on headphones and crank up the volume to levels that hurt my ears. The whisper cuts through everything. I feel my chest tighten whenever it speaks. My arms get goosebumps, and a cold sweat breaks out on my forehead. I get so jumpy that even a normal sound like a neighbor slamming a door sends my heart racing. A few weeks into this torment, I began noticing a sensation of pressure on my shoulder. It happens at random. I can be walking down the hallway or washing dishes in the sink when I feel a cold hand rest on me. The first time it happened, I dropped a glass on the floor. It shattered and the noise almost made me jump out of my skin. I turned around, but there was no one behind me. The whisper started up again right away. It said my name in a drawn-out hiss, then rattled off another one of my secrets, one I haven't thought about in years. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly pick up the shards of broken glass. I felt like I was being watched the entire time. One evening, I decided to stay out as late as possible. I spent hours at a diner, sipping coffee that tasted burnt. I didn't want to go home. I was convinced that if I stayed away, the thing in my room couldn't bother me. But eventually, I had to come back. When I unlocked the door, my apartment felt ice cold. I checked the thermostat. It read 72, but it felt closer to 50 in there. I locked the door behind me and switched on every light in the place. I looked in closets, under furniture, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. No shapes, no silhouettes, no figures lurking around. Yet the whisper still started the moment I turned off the kitchen light. It said my name again and then laughed in a low, rasping voice. My mouth went dry. I managed to mutter a few swear words under my breath and stumbled toward my bedroom, flipping on lamps as I went. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake that cold dread. I reached out to a few friends, hoping one of them would let me crash on their couch. I just needed one decent night's sleep. But people have their own schedules and responsibilities, and I felt uncomfortable explaining why I needed a place to crash. I wasn't even sure I wanted to tell them about this. I worried they'd think I was losing my mind. So I stayed home. The next night, I wrapped myself in a thick blanket on the couch and tried to keep the lights on. I stayed that way until exhaustion forced me to close my eyes. I might have slept for 10 minutes when I felt that hand on my shoulder again. I leapt up, nearly tripping over the coffee table. The whisper echoed through the living room, calling my name in that slow, deliberate tone. I could feel every hair on my body stand on end. My eyes watered, and my breath came in short, ragged bursts. Then everything went quiet for a few seconds, and I heard the floor creak behind me. I spun around, scanning the room, but there was no shape in the dim light, just the flicker of a lamp by the TV. I keep telling myself I should move, but I'm stuck with a lease, and money doesn't grow on trees. I also worry that wherever I go, this thing might follow me. It doesn't seem tied to the apartment itself. It's more like it's bound to me. I've tried looking up explanations online, but I can't find anything that makes sense. Most of what I see is advice about ignoring it or cleansing my living space. I don't feel any relief when I burn sage or sprinkle salt by the doorway. I've tried both. The whisper just laughs like it's amused by my attempts. Lately, I've stopped talking to people as much. I feel tired all the time, and I'm afraid my nerves are too shot to act normal in public. I've called in sick to work more times than I'd like to admit. When I do go, I'm on edge, jumping at every little sound. People ask if I'm feeling all right, and I just force a half smile. I tell them I haven't been sleeping well, which is true enough. I can't focus on anything. Even in broad daylight, I see quick movements in the corners of my eyes. I hear faint footsteps trailing behind me. I feel that awful coldness. It radiates from my shoulder down my back whenever I sense that invisible touch. One night, I tried talking to it. I sat in my bedroom with the lights off, heart pounding, and forced myself to speak. My voice shook as I asked what it wanted, but I got no direct reply. It just said my name, then rattled off another secret. I felt a surge of anger. I wanted to punch something, but there was no physical target. I demanded it leave me alone. All I got was that same rasping laugh. Then the whisper went silent for a few minutes, which almost felt worse than hearing it. In that silence, my thoughts raced and fear settled in my gut. After a while, it started whispering again, repeating my name in an endless loop until I had to cover my ears and leave the room. I tried sleeping in the bathtub once, hoping that the change of location would throw it off. The bathroom is cramped, with plain tiles and a single overhead light, so I thought maybe it wouldn't follow me there. I filled the tub with a few inches of warm water and tried to relax, but the whisper found me almost immediately. I jumped up, nearly slipping on the slick porcelain. I flicked on the overhead light, but that didn't help. The voice sounded closer than ever, coming from right behind the shower curtain. I ripped the curtain open, feeling my skin crawl. Nothing was there. I left the water running, grabbed a towel, and sat in the living room again, shaking with frustration. I've never felt so powerless. Nothing I do stops the whisper or that freezing hand on my shoulder. I try to stay calm, but my body reacts every time. My legs shake, my breathing gets shallow, and I can't seem to control it. I've had moments where I felt dizzy from all the adrenaline pumping through me. At night, my muscles are always tensed, ready to jump out of bed at the slightest noise. I barely eat, and I can't remember the last time I slept more than an hour or two. The worst part is the way the whisper knows so much about me. It brings up past mistakes, regrets, and private details I've never shared. Hearing it list those things sets me on edge. It reminds me that there's no safe corner in my own head. I've tried yelling at it, but I don't think it cares. It never responds to my questions directly, just circles back to saying my name and those old secrets. Sometimes it sounds like it's right next to my ear, and I'll jerk away, expecting to see a face. But there's only emptiness. I've turned into someone I barely recognize. I used to enjoy evenings at home, playing games or watching movies. Now, I dread the sun going down. Every flicker of light and shadow makes me flinch. My reflection in windows sometimes looks strange, as if I'm seeing someone else. I've seen my own eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. My shoulders sag with exhaustion, and I'm losing weight fast because my appetite is gone. I keep expecting to wake up from a nightmare, but this is my reality. Some nights I consider leaving the lights on and trying to force myself to ignore the whisper. That never works. The whisper is always there, always calling, always dropping hints about things I'd rather forget. I picture it lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to turn my head so it can slip closer. Sometimes I feel a faint breeze on the back of my neck, like a breath. My heart pounds so loud I can hear the blood rushing in my ears. I spin around again and again, but there's nothing to see. Last night I attempted something I never did before. I stood in the dark and pressed my back against the wall so I couldn't be touched from behind. I stood there until my legs began to ache. Every time the whisper spoke, I tried to stay calm. Eventually, my knees felt weak, and I had to sit down. The moment I dropped to the floor, I felt that icy hand on my shoulder again. I scrambled away, banging my head on the corner of a small dresser. The pain made me curse out loud. My vision blurred for a second, and the whisper turned into that laugh. It was a harsh, low rumble that sent cold waves through my entire body. Now, as I tell you all this, I'm sitting in my living room with a single lamp on. It's around midnight. The whisper is in the background, but I'm trying to push it aside long enough to speak clearly. My hands are shaking. My mouth is dry. I can't stop checking the hallway, convinced I'll see something emerge. I know it's only a matter of time before I feel that hand again, or hear my name repeated in that cold voice. I keep thinking about what will happen if it finally decides to show itself. I'm not sure I want to know. I can't imagine what it looks like or if it even has a shape at all. I'm reaching the end of my rope. I can't rest. I can't think straight. I'm stuck listening to my own name echo in the dark. I feel like the walls of my apartment are closing in on me, but I know I can't just run. This thing follows me, day and night. It's never satisfied, always getting closer, always reminding me that it knows everything about me. Sometimes I stand near the door, thinking about stepping outside. But then I remember how the whisper haunts me even in broad daylight. I can't escape it. I'm convinced it's waiting for something. I don't know what, and that uncertainty grinds my nerves raw. I'm talking to you now because I need someone to listen. I need to share what's been going on. Maybe hearing myself say it out loud will help me realize I'm not losing my mind. I keep hoping there's a rational explanation, but every day I find fewer reasons to believe that. I hear it again right now. It's using that same low tone, drawing out each syllable of my name. I feel the pressure on my shoulder. My entire body is trembling. I'm going to turn around one more time. I know I won't see anything, I never do. But I have to check, because deep down I'm still terrified that the moment I stop looking, it will appear, and I'll finally understand what's really lurking in the darkness. And right now, I'm not sure how I'll handle that moment when it comes. I got that mirror from my grandfather's estate 2 weeks after his funeral. I remember standing in his old workshop, sifting through boxes of dusty tools and piles of clutter. I saw the mirror leaning against a wall. It had a small crack in the top corner, so I asked my uncle why nobody fixed it. He shrugged. He just said it belonged to my grandfather for decades. My uncle suggested I take it home. I didn't hesitate. I've always liked old stuff, especially pieces that carry some history, and I assumed this mirror would be no different. I placed it in my bedroom. I set it against the wall near my closet. The first time I looked at it in my house, I felt a weird discomfort in my stomach. The crack in the top corner was about 1/2 inch long. It didn't look like a big deal, so I didn't worry. I figured I could get it repaired eventually. For the first few days, everything seemed fine. I woke up, got dressed, glanced at my reflection. Nothing unusual, but one morning I was tying my shoelaces and caught my reflection behind me in the mirror. I saw myself blink. It looked normal at first, but then I realized my reflection seemed to blink a beat after I did. I paused and stared at the mirror. My eyes felt strained. I held my gaze to see if I was just imagining it. I blinked once, slowly. My reflection blinked a fraction of a second later, not at the same time. My heart pounded. I backed away and looked at my hands. They looked normal. Then I glanced back at the mirror. My reflection stood still, looking straight at me, not moving an inch. My pulse throbbed in my temples. I turned away and pretended I had somewhere else to be. That night I tried to forget about it. I crawled into bed and switched off the lamp. The mirror stood in the dark, catching a bit of moonlight. I felt like something in that reflection was still awake. I rolled over, closed my eyes, and told myself I just needed better sleep. The next day I caught a glimpse of the crack. It seemed bigger. I ran my fingertip over it. I could feel the jagged edge like a little chip. It wasn't just a small line anymore. It had spread, maybe an inch in length. I found it strange because I hadn't touched the mirror. I hadn't bumped into it or dropped anything on it. I decided to keep an eye on it. That evening, I walked into my bedroom after brushing my teeth. As soon as I entered, I felt a chill on my neck. The mirror was in its usual spot, but the glass didn't seem as reflective. It looked clouded near the crack. The crack now had a thin gray haze leaking out. It wasn't smoke, but it looked like a little patch of mist. I swallowed hard and turned on the overhead light. The mirror just looked old and scratched, but I swear I saw a faint swirl in the glass. I approached it and stared, trying to see if there was moisture trapped between the layers of glass. My reflection stared back. My forehead broke into a sweat. I blinked twice, fast. My reflection blinked a moment later, still not in sync. My arms felt heavy. My throat went dry. I decided to test something. I raised my right hand. My reflection did the same, but there was a noticeable lag, like half a second. I lowered my hand. The reflection mirrored me, but again, too late. My entire body felt tight and I started to breathe faster. I left the room and paced around in the living room trying to collect myself. After a while, I went back in. I didn't look directly at the mirror. I tried to ignore it while I got under the covers. I left the lights on that night. The following morning, I checked the mirror first thing. The crack had spread again. It stretched from the top corner about 2 inches down. The glass around it had that swirling fog. It made me think of frost, but it didn't feel cold to the touch. I pressed my palm against the glass. It was room temperature, but it felt different, like the surface was slightly soft. I jerked my hand back. I smelled something stale, like old basement air. I looked around, trying to figure out if it was coming from the mirror, but I couldn't be certain. That day, I stayed out of the bedroom as much as I could. I kept busy in the living room and kitchen, watched TV, scrolled through my phone, tried to distract myself. But every time I passed by my bedroom door, I felt that tightness in my chest again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in there behind the glass. It was as if the mirror was waiting for me. By late afternoon, I decided to confront it. I took a deep breath, opened the bedroom door, and flipped on the light. The mirror looked the same, except the crack had widened into a thin fissure. I stared at my reflection for a long time. My reflection stared back, blinking too late, opening its mouth an instant after I did. I felt lightheaded, like the floor was shifting under me. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I walked up to the mirror and gently tilted it forward, trying to see the back. It was just plain wood backing. I ran my hand over it. I heard a faint scraping sound from the front. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. I looked at the reflection again and I saw it had a slight smirk on its face, but my own lips were straight. I touched my lips. They were pressed together, but in the mirror I saw them curved upward. I stumbled backward, bumping into my nightstand. My reflection's smirk vanished a second later, as if it realized it was out of sync. I felt something like panic twist in my gut. I tried to calm down and told myself I would just throw a sheet over it. I opened my closet, grabbed an old sheet, and stepped to the mirror. Right before I could cover it, I saw the crack widen again, maybe a fraction of an inch. but enough to make a slight popping sound. A thin swirl of haze seeped from the glass. I swear it moved like a wisp of fog, drifting upward. I didn't smell anything this time, but I thought I heard a soft hiss. I dropped the sheet. My hands shook. I felt a chill that ran from my back to my fingertips. I considered leaving the house, but I live alone, and I didn't want to run away from my own bedroom. I decided to place the mirror face down on the floor. I reached behind it, lifted it carefully, and lowered it until the reflective surface faced the floor. The crack made a soft crunching noise against the wood. I stood there, staring at the wooden backing now facing up. I exhaled, feeling relieved that I didn't have to look at my out-of-sync reflection anymore. That night I tried to sleep. Around midnight I woke up hearing a faint scratching sound. I sat up in bed, my heart banging against my ribs. I looked toward the floor. The mirror was still face down, but I heard a tap, like someone gently knocking from the other side of the glass. I climbed out of bed, stepped closer, and listened. I heard another tap. My throat felt like it was closing up. I froze in place and my hand trembled. I leaned over, put my ear close to the mirror, and heard a slow scraping noise like nails on glass. My stomach clenched. I grabbed the sheet and flung it over the mirror, tucking the edges underneath so it couldn't move. The tapping stopped. I stood there for a while, barely breathing. Then I crawled back onto the bed, not sleeping a wink. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stand having that mirror in my bedroom anymore. I lugged it down the hall and stuck it in a spare closet. I pressed it against the far wall and shut the door. I spent the day trying to relax. I did laundry, cooked a simple lunch, and listened to music to distract myself. But every time I walked past that closet, I heard a soft thump. I tried to ignore it. My body felt tense and my mouth was dry. My head pounded. By evening, I noticed a draft in the hallway. It came from that closet door. It was cold air, almost like an air conditioning vent, except my AC wasn't on. I pressed my hand to the door. The wood felt cool. I listened. The mirror made a slight creaking sound. The floor under my feet seemed unsteady. I had trouble sleeping again. My mind kept drifting to that delayed reflection, that out-of-place smirk, the hiss of that fog. I told myself I should just smash it, but part of me didn't want to risk making it worse. The crack was already letting something through. What if breaking the mirror opened it wider? By morning, my nerves were shot. I stood outside the closet debating what to do. I finally opened the door. The sheet had slipped off the mirror. The mirror was upright, as if someone had propped it against the wall. My jaw clenched. I remembered placing it face down, but there it was, leaning upright. The crack had opened more. It now ran halfway down the glass, with that gray haze swirling around it. I swallowed hard and stepped closer. A cool draft hit my face. I peered at the reflection. At first, I only saw myself. Then I noticed that my reflection's chest rose and fell out of sync. It breathed slower than I did, like it was on a slight delay. I watched my own face. I blinked twice, but in the reflection, I only blinked once. My head started to spin. I couldn't take it. I lifted the mirror again, trying to force it back to the floor. Then it happened. I saw movement behind my reflection, like a shape shifting in the fog. It was just a blur, but I heard a faint sigh. Or maybe it was a breath. My grip slipped, and I almost dropped the mirror. I set it down carefully. I stood there, forcing myself to keep my eyes on the glass. The reflection's lips parted a moment after mine did. My spine tingled. I felt like I was going to pass out. I pushed the mirror flat on the floor again, pressed my knee against it, and tried to keep it still. The glass felt strange, like it had a soft give under my palm. My reflection's face looked up at me from the floor, staring. I refused to let go, but my arms started shaking. Suddenly, I heard a soft rasping sound, like a muffled voice pushing through water. I leaned my ear close, trying to make it out. I realized it was coming from the crack. Something was on the other side. My skin crawled. I felt sweat dripping down my neck. My thoughts were jumbled. I wanted to get rid of the mirror, but I didn't know how. I pictured myself hauling it outside and dumping it, but I worried that whatever was attached to it might follow me. I grabbed duct tape from the kitchen drawer. My hands trembled while I taped the edges of the mirror, trying to cover the crack. I pressed strips of tape along the fissure, sealing that opening. The swirling haze pressed against the tape from inside the glass. I heard that hiss again. I stood up, heart pounding, and waited. The mirror stayed quiet. The reflection looked normal for a moment. I stared down at myself lying on the floor, pinned under tape. That was enough for me. I dragged the mirror into the garage, placed it against a wall, and stacked boxes in front of it. Then I walked away. I still hear noises at night. I still sense that cool draft coming from under the door that leads to the garage. I've thought about taking a hammer to it. I've thought about calling someone to haul it off, but I can't bring myself to do it yet. Part of me is scared that if I break the glass, I'll release whatever's waiting on the other side. For now, the mirror is hidden behind those boxes. The crack is taped shut. When I go out there, I can hear a faint thump maybe once or twice a day. It's like something's trying to get through. I have no idea how to fix it, and I have no idea if it will ever stop. But I can't face it again. I can't look at that reflection anymore. So I leave it there, behind the boxes, hoping it doesn't move, hoping it stays taped shut, and hoping I don't have to see that delayed blink or that twisted smirk ever again. I never thought I'd find a cave that felt colder than a freezer in the middle of a blazing hot region. I remember stepping off the trail, feeling the sun beating down on my shoulders, sweat soaking through my shirt. My backpack straps cut into my skin, and my mouth felt dry from hours of hiking. I was used to that kind of discomfort because I liked the challenge of exploring unknown places. But I wasn't expecting the sudden drop in temperature when I brushed aside some thick bushes and discovered a dark opening in the rock. At first, I hesitated. I stood there trying to make sense of that freezing air rolling out of the cave entrance. It didn't match the environment. There was no wind, so I couldn't figure out why I felt that chill on my face and arms. My fingertips tingled from the abrupt change in temperature. That strange cold made my stomach clench like something was off. I pulled out my flashlight to see if the passage looked stable. The ground at the entrance was made of gravel and loose stones. The drop in temperature kept my senses on alert. I slowly moved forward, letting my flashlight sweep across the rocky walls. The beam caught dust particles floating in the air. My boots made a crunching sound, and every time I took a step, it echoed with a dull thud. The cave's walls had streaks of some dark mineral. It reminded me of charred marks, but I didn't want to jump to any weird conclusions. I only noted what I saw. The deeper I went, the more I noticed an odd, damp smell. It wasn't musty like most caves. It was more like cold stone and stale air. After a few steps, I paused. I listened. I heard nothing at first, just my own breathing. Then, I picked up a faint whisper, as if two people were speaking somewhere far ahead. It was so soft that I almost thought it was my imagination. I turned off my flashlight to see if that changed anything. It just made the dark thicker. My eyes tried to adjust, and I couldn't see a thing. I heard the whisper again, maybe a bit clearer. It sounded like words, but I couldn't make out any language. My chest got tight and my heart pounded. I flipped the flashlight back on. I took a few more steps, not sure whether I should turn back or keep going. My legs felt shaky and my breath got shallow. Despite feeling uneasy, I couldn't let it go. The cave tugged at me. I felt this odd pull, like something was waiting to be discovered. I reminded myself I'd explored plenty of dark places before. I had my emergency gear, a backup headlamp, and I knew how to handle tight corridors. Still, I couldn't shake the uncomfortable sensation. My gut told me this was different. I crept forward, trying not to make much noise. My boots scuffed over some sharp rocks. I could see my breath forming little puffs in the beam of the flashlight. That's how cold it was. My hands trembled a bit from the chill, and I had to flex my fingers to keep them warm. The whispering didn't stop. It seemed to move around me, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. At one moment, it was coming from my left, near a jagged wall with narrow cracks. Then it shifted to the right side, near a cluster of stalagmites. My pulse raced. I felt sweat on my forehead, but the rest of my body was cold. The conflict between the heat I'd come from outside and this eerie cold made my head spin. As I continued deeper, I noticed a subtle shift in the cave's layout. The passageway opened up. The ceiling rose higher, and I saw what looked like old carvings on some parts of the rock. They were faint lines and shapes that formed patterns. I brushed my hand over a few of them, feeling the grooves under my fingertips. My flashlight revealed what seemed like symbols or marks left by past explorers. I wondered how old they were. I also wondered if they'd heard the same whispers. The thought made me uneasy. The further I advanced, the more the whispers turned into soft echoes. They weren't loud, but they surrounded me. Sometimes I thought I heard my name. My heart kept thumping, and my mouth went dry. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten. I kept sweeping the flashlight around, half expecting to see someone else. But there was nobody. I felt trapped by that cold atmosphere. My mind started to play tricks on me. I thought I saw shadows move along the walls. Each time I turned my flashlight in that direction, I saw only stone. My legs felt tired, but I kept going. I told myself I'd gone too far to turn back without at least checking if there was an end to that tunnel. The floor turned slippery in places. Water dripped from above, forming little puddles. My flashlight reflected off the wet surfaces, creating brief flashes. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. I had this nagging feeling I was being watched. My skin prickled at random intervals, and the back of my neck felt tense. I tried to steady my nerves by focusing on where I placed my feet. After walking another 15 minutes, I came across a small chamber. It wasn't huge, but it was big enough to stand up straight without bumping my head on the ceiling. In the middle, I found a cluster of bizarre stone formations. Some were smooth and others had sharp edges. A few had cracks that looked like open mouths. I felt a chill roll through my chest when I glanced at them. The whispers intensified. They seemed to come from every corner of that chamber. My heart pounded so hard that I felt it in my ears. I stood still, shining the flashlight around. My breath came in quick bursts and my palms were damp with sweat. I leaned in to check one of the stone formations. As I touched it, the whispering paused for a second. My entire body went rigid. I could hear my pulse and the faint drip of water from somewhere behind me. Then the whispering started again, quietly, and I felt a pressure in my chest. I pulled my hand away, stepping back to get some distance. I wanted to catch my breath, but I also felt weirdly intrigued. My curiosity kept me there, even though my instincts told me to leave. I don't know how long I lingered in that chamber, listening to the walls. The echoes sometimes overlapped, and I thought I heard a sort of dialogue. I couldn't identify any familiar words, but it felt like it had a rhythm. I kept turning in circles, trying to locate the source. My muscles were tense and my jaw was clenched. I let out a shaky exhale and forced myself to step away. The cold had seeped into my bones and I realized I was shivering. I decided it was best to go back. My gut twisted with both fear and a strange yearning to keep exploring, but I chose to retrace my steps. On the way out, the cave didn't get any warmer. The whispering never completely vanished, but it faded as I got closer to the entrance. I had this persistent feeling the cave didn't want me to leave. When I saw a faint glow of sunlight, I felt relief mixed with regret. Part of me wanted to turn around and go deeper just to see what else might be hidden, but I pushed myself forward. My breaths were shallow and my legs felt weak. I glanced over my shoulder a few times as if expecting the darkness to close in on me. Stepping out into the heat felt overwhelming. The sun hit my face and the warmth on my skin made me squint. I inhaled the hot air, which felt almost suffocating, but it was better than the cold pressure inside the cave. I let out a long breath, my heart still racing from the tension. I sat down on a flat rock a few steps away from the cave entrance. My mind was spinning and I felt this empty sensation in my chest. I tried to shake it off by drinking some water and wiping the sweat off my forehead. It didn't help much. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that place. I replayed the sounds in my head, questioning if I'd imagined them. My chest felt heavy every time I remembered the whispering. I tried to distract myself by going on different trails, checking out less intense cave systems, and talking to other hikers. But nothing felt the same. That weird cold sensation stayed with me, like my body never fully adjusted back to the normal temperature. At night, I found it hard to sleep because my thoughts circled around that freezing atmosphere and those carvings on the walls. I soon realized I was restless and edgy. I caught myself pacing in my living room, replaying every moment from the cave. I could almost feel the crunch of gravel under my boots, the scuffing sound echoing in the darkness. I remembered the damp smell and that lingering hush between the whispers. My heart would speed up and my chest would tighten as if I was back there. It felt like something was missing inside me, like a chunk of my consciousness stayed behind in that chamber. I tried to fight the urge to return, telling myself it was just another cave. But I couldn't shake off the sense that I'd left something important in there. My thoughts were scattered. I couldn't focus on daily tasks. The emptiness grew. I started to think about heading back, maybe to see if I could figure out what caused those sounds. At the same time, the idea of returning sent my pulse racing. I pictured myself standing in that cold darkness, hearing those soft echoes again. When I told a friend about my experience, I avoided the details of the whispering. I just mentioned that I found a weirdly cold cave and felt creeped out. He joked about me watching too many scary movies, and he suggested I let it go. I nodded, but I knew I couldn't. The hollow feeling in my chest made me anxious. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, covered in sweat, with the memory of that whispering so sharp in my mind that I felt I was still there. I tried to plan a return trip, but kept postponing it. Part of me feared the unknown aspect of that place. Another part wanted to confirm if the cave was truly that strange, or if I'd just been exhausted and spooked myself. But whenever I closed my eyes, I saw those jagged formations and heard that muttering that seemed to slide along the walls. My heart would hammer against my ribs. Eventually, I decided I needed to write down what happened, hoping it would help me process it. As I wrote each detail, I felt my hands shaking. My skin prickled again with that memory of the freezing air against my face. I remembered the exact moment my flashlight caught dust particles in the stillness, and the hush that hovered before those whispers started back up. Putting it into words almost pulled me back inside. Now I'm still dealing with the aftermath. I feel like my lungs never quite fill up completely. My chest feels constricted. I keep my gear ready, in case I decide to head out there again. I haven't mustered the courage yet, but the pull won't go away. There's a hole in me that won't close. I notice it every morning when I wake up and every evening when I settle in for the night. I don't talk about this much. It's a strange thing to explain. People expect a big dramatic story, and I only have the cold facts. I found a cave. It was unnaturally cold. I heard whispers, and I left feeling incomplete. No children or other people were there, and nobody died. But ever since that day, I can't shake the feeling that part of me stayed behind. When I say that, I'm not trying to sound mysterious, that's just how it feels. My chest gets tight and a shiver runs through me whenever I think about it. I'm not sure how to move forward, but I keep telling myself I have to find closure. Some nights, I picture myself stepping back inside the cave with better equipment, maybe setting up a camera or a digital recorder to capture those sounds. I get nervous imagining the freezing air around me again, the goosebumps all over my arms. My throat gets dry just thinking about it, but I also feel drawn to it, like I need to confront whatever is behind that darkness. For now, I live with that emptiness. I go about my day, but I keep remembering the crunch of stones under my boots and the sudden drop in temperature. I keep hearing that distant whisper that seemed to brush against my ears. I still don't have answers, but I can't forget the way the walls seemed alive, the way those echoes bounced around me. The memory of that place clings to me, and I'm not sure I'll ever be the same. I feel stuck between wanting to go back and wanting to pretend I never found that cave. That's the whole story. It's just me, the cave, and the cold that made no sense. I have no proof. No dramatic conclusion, just the physical memories imprinted on my body and the lingering tension in my mind. It still scares me, but it's also part of who I am now. I don't know if I'll ever set foot in that cave again, but if I do, I wonder if I'll feel that part of me slip back into place, or if I'll lose even more of myself to the whispers that live in those walls. For now, I carry on, hoping that the chill in my chest might fade with time, even though I can't shake the suspicion that it won't. I accepted the invitation without much thought. I got the letter from a distant relative, someone I barely remembered meeting years ago. The message was brief and said he wanted me to spend a few days at his old house in the countryside, far from any major town. It felt strange, but I agreed. I had some time off and I wanted a change of scenery. I drove there on a late afternoon, following a dirt road that stretched through wide fields. As soon as I saw the tall iron gates and the old stone walls, I felt a tension in my stomach. The house looked stuck in a different age. The air was heavy, and I noticed my heartbeat picking up for no clear reason. I parked my car in a small yard filled with dry leaves. I saw no caretaker, no other guests, and no lights. The sky was overcast, and the wind had an odd stillness. I grabbed my bag and walked up the stone steps. When I opened the heavy wooden door, my arms shook a bit from the effort. The hinges creaked. Inside, the entrance hall was dim, lit only by a single lamp in the corner. I could see old furniture, a tall ceiling, and a wide staircase leading to the second floor. Everything seemed frozen. My footsteps echoed with an odd crispness. That was when I noticed the big clock on the wall to my left. The wood frame was carved with twisting patterns, and the glass face was large, taking up most of the surface. But it had no hands. It was just an empty face with numbered markings. For some reason, my chest felt tight when I looked at it. It seemed like it was staring back at me. I stood there for a moment, waiting for some kind of ticking sound or mechanical hum, but I got nothing. The entire house stayed silent. It was so quiet that I could hear my own breathing. I also realized I didn't hear any wildlife outside. No birds, no insects, nothing. I set my bag down at the base of the staircase and called out, but I got no answer. I didn't see any staff around. I knew my distant relative wasn't supposed to arrive until the next morning, so I assumed I had the house to myself for the night. That should have felt liberating, but it made me uneasy. I thought about leaving, but I brushed aside the idea. I had driven for hours and I felt too tired to get back on the road. I picked up my bag, walked upstairs, and searched for a guest room. I found one at the end of the hallway. It was clean but had a thin layer of dust on the desk in the corner. The bed was old, with a tall wooden frame and a thick mattress. I tossed my bag onto a chair. I went back downstairs to check if there was anything in the kitchen. I found some basic supplies, a few cans of soup, a bread loaf on the counter that looked fresh, and a pitcher of water. I heated the soup on a small stove that seemed about 50 years old. As I waited for it to warm, I kept listening for any sound, but the house stayed completely silent. It pressed against my ears in an uncomfortable way. After I ate, I returned to the entrance hall. I stared at that big clock again. It bothered me. It gave off a feeling that something was missing, but I told myself that it was just a harmless antique. I shook my head and went back to my room. I shut the door and locked it. I turned on the small lamp next to the bed and flipped through an old magazine I found in a drawer. The pages smelled musty. My legs felt restless, so I paced around the room for a while. After about an hour, I felt tired enough to sleep. I got under the covers, turned off the lamp, and lay there in the dark, trying not to think about the emptiness of the house. My eyes wouldn't stay closed for long. I kept opening them, waiting for a noise in the hallway. My heart beat a bit faster than normal. My breathing felt shallow. Eventually, I managed to drift off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I jolted awake. A deep, resonant sound echoed through the hallway. It sounded like a distant bell. I blinked, staring into the darkness. My mind raced with questions. There was no clock with working parts in this place. There were no visible bells, but I heard a low chime. It vibrated in my chest. I got out of bed, my legs unsteady, and crept to the door. I opened it just a crack. The hallway was dark, lit only by moonlight through a small window. I smelled something old in the air, like stale dust and cold stone. I stood there listening. My ears picked up another chime. It was the same deep note. It seemed to come from downstairs near the entrance hall. It gave me a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I reached for my phone to check the time, but it wouldn't turn on. The battery was dead, even though I had charged it fully on the drive. I felt a jolt of confusion. I looked at my watch instead. The hands were frozen at 11. I tapped the glass, but nothing changed. I took a few slow steps into the hallway, trying not to make noise. Each step made the old floorboards creak. My breathing felt tight. I kept waiting for a third chime, but it didn't come. I reached the staircase and leaned forward, peering down. The hallway light was off, but I saw a faint glow coming from the entrance hall. It flickered a bit. I took one more step and I heard a small thud behind me. I turned, feeling my chest seize up. There was nothing there, just shadows. I whispered a few curses to myself. My hands were shaking and sweat formed on my forehead. I decided to go back to the bedroom. I didn't know what else to do. I locked the door again and sat on the bed. My heart pounded so hard that I felt it in my ears. After a few minutes, I closed my eyes and tried to fall asleep. I listened for more chimes but heard nothing. I eventually dozed off, but it wasn't restful. I stirred around 2 in the morning. My head felt heavy. The air smelled stale, like an old attic. I got up, walked to the window, and looked outside. It was pitch black. I couldn't even see the yard or the fence. Suddenly, I felt disoriented, as if I had lost a chunk of time. My eyes stung, and my hands felt cold. I turned on the bedside lamp, and I looked around the room. It looked the same, but something felt off. I couldn't name it. I stepped into the hallway again. My legs felt weak, but I kept going. The silence was overwhelming. I had an urge to make noise just to fill the space. I forced myself to keep quiet because I thought there might be something else in the house. My instincts warned me not to call attention to myself. I walked toward the stairs, and I heard a faint scraping sound behind a nearby door. It was a guest room or maybe a storage room. I froze, my muscles stiffening. I felt my pulse in my temples. The scraping continued for 2 or 3 seconds, then it stopped. I tried to calm my breathing. I pressed my ear to the door. I couldn't hear any movement, so I backed away. I headed downstairs. Each step felt like it took forever. When I reached the entrance hall, the faint glow was gone. The lamp in the corner was off. I glanced at the big clock on the wall. Still no hands. Still silent. The glass face reflected the small amount of moonlight that filtered in from outside. I approached it, trying to see if there was any sign of a mechanism. I touched the wood, and it felt cold. The silence made my ears ring. Then the deep chime rang again. It pulsed through my chest. I jumped and turned around. The hall was empty. I looked at the clock's face, and I saw a slight distortion, like something moved behind the glass. I leaned in, trying to see it more clearly, but there was nothing there. My hands felt sweaty, and I wiped them on my pants. I took a few steps back, trying not to trip on the rug. I noticed the front door was closed, but not locked. I considered leaving right then. I reached for the doorknob, turned it slowly, and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing the front yard under the moonlight. I saw my car. I could leave, but an odd sense of uncertainty made me hesitate. The invitation had said to wait until morning to meet my host. I felt trapped by curiosity and by a strange sense of obligation. I stepped outside, inhaled the cool night air, and listened. The wind was still, and the fields were dark. My breath looked thick in the cold air. I thought about driving away, but something kept me from moving forward. I returned to my room and tried to get some rest. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the sound of that chime. I lay in bed until dawn, drifting in and out of shallow sleep. When the pale light of morning came, I got up, rubbed my eyes, and looked at my watch. It still read 11. I grabbed my phone and saw that it was dead again. I plugged it into my charger, but it showed no response. I got dressed and went downstairs. The house felt different with the daylight, but the silence remained. I walked around, checking each room. Most of them were dusty or covered in sheets. There was a musty library, a drawing room with covered furniture, and several locked doors I couldn't open. No sign of my relative. No sign of anyone at all. I found some cereal in a kitchen cabinet and ate a bit. The front door was still unlocked, so I stepped outside to see if I could get a phone signal. There was nothing. I tried to start my car, but the engine refused to turn over. The battery was completely dead. I stood in the yard, looking at the stone walls and tall windows. I felt a slow panic creeping up. My hands shook and my breathing got heavier. I went back inside, searching for a phone line or some kind of landline. I found an old rotary phone in a small office near the back of the house, but it had no dial tone. I had no way to contact anyone. The day passed slowly. I heard nothing. At one point, I thought I caught a glimpse of someone in the upstairs hallway, but when I ran up there, the corridor was empty. As evening approached, a strong sense of dread settled over me. My stomach felt tight. I was sweating even though the air was cool. I realized I hadn't seen the sun move in the sky. It seemed stuck behind clouds. I tried to keep myself occupied by searching every room I could unlock. Most of the doors were firmly shut. The ones that opened led to dusty bedrooms or storage areas. The silence never changed. That night, I lay in bed with the lamp on. I couldn't face the dark again. Around what I guessed was midnight, I heard the chime. It was louder. The sound vibrated in the walls. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. My skin felt clammy. That was when I sensed a distortion in the air, like everything had shifted. I felt dizzy. I looked at the door, and for a second, it seemed like it flickered. The space around me felt the same, but also different. I got up, stood by the door, and waited. The chime hit again, a deep and slow note. My mind raced. I felt the distinct impression that I had experienced this moment before. My thoughts spun, and I wondered if I was dreaming. I touched my arm with my fingertips and felt the pressure, so I was definitely awake. I pulled the door open and stepped into the hallway. As soon as I did, the light in my room blinked off. The corridor looked the same, but my body felt heavier. I could hear my pulse in my head. My skin felt cold. I realized that each time I heard the chime, I was looping back to some earlier state. Yet I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment of each loop. It was just a strong impression in my gut and a weird tension in my muscles. I noticed the door to the guest room across the hallway was ajar, even though it had been shut before. I approached it. My hands trembled, and sweat slid down my temples. I reached for the doorknob, but I hesitated. I held my breath, listening. I heard a faint rustling inside, like fabric moving. I pulled my hand away. My instincts screamed at me to back off. Then I heard a slow creak in the corridor behind me, like a footstep on old floorboards. I spun around, my chest pounding. There was no one there. I felt something watching me, but I couldn't see anything. My throat tightened. My breath came in short gasps. The air felt charged. I took a step back, then another. The boards groaned under my feet. I thought I saw a shadow shift on the far wall, but it was gone in a blink. I heard the chime again. My head spun and I shut my eyes. It felt like my stomach turned in on itself. My legs almost gave out, but I stayed on my feet. When I opened my eyes, the hallway lamp was on again, even though it had been off just seconds before. I realized I had returned to some earlier point in the night. The door to the guest room was shut. The tension in my chest grew stronger and I thought I might throw up. I swallowed hard and wiped my mouth. I heard a soft drag of something along the floor behind me, but when I glanced over my shoulder, the corridor was empty. I stumbled toward the staircase and hurried downstairs. I looked at the clock. Still no hands, still no ticking. It looked exactly the same. My breathing was shaky. I reached out and tapped the glass face. I felt no vibration or movement. The chime sounded yet again, louder than before. I almost dropped to my knees. My ears rang. The house seemed to shift around me. The front door, which I had left open earlier, was now closed and bolted. I felt trapped. I wiped sweat from my forehead, trying to steady my nerves. Each time that chime rang, I felt I was getting pulled backward in time, forced to repeat the same stretch of night. And each time I sensed something walking through the corridors, approaching me at a slower pace than real time should allow. But I couldn't see it. My chest felt tight as I thought about that presence. Every hair on my arm stood up. I'm still here. I don't know how many times I've lived through these same moments. The clock never changes, yet it chimes over and over. My phone stays dead, and my watch is stuck at 11. The house remains silent except for that sound. I can't escape it and I can't understand it. The presence moves closer with each repetition. I can sense it more clearly now. I hear slight shifts in the air, faint creaks in the floor, gentle taps on the walls. My palms sweat each time. My heart races. My thoughts spiral as I wait for the chime to pull me back once again. And each time, it feels more real, and the footsteps get a bit louder. I have no idea what will happen if it reaches me. I only know that time isn't working here. I'm stuck in these same hours going in circles. I can't stop listening for those deep chimes, dreading the moment they sound again. I got the invitation on a Thursday afternoon. The envelope showed up in my mailbox without a sender's name or address. It was a thick, white envelope with a neat black seal. The message inside asked me to prepare an exclusive dinner in a large mansion on the outskirts of town. The note mentioned a high fee and promised complete discretion. It didn't include the client's name or any personal details, but it gave me a specific date and time. It also listed the dishes the client requested. The handwriting was smooth and elegant. I felt a mix of excitement and confusion because I'd never received a job offer in such a secretive way. I decided to accept. The money was too good, and I couldn't resist the chance to cook in a new environment. I arrived at the mansion around dusk on the scheduled day. The exterior looked enormous. The walls were white stone with tall, dark windows. There were statues along a long driveway, all facing me like silent guards. My car rumbled over gravel until I reached a wide set of steps leading up to a huge black door. I knocked once and the door opened by itself. No one greeted me in the foyer. I walked in and felt a slight chill, even though the air outside had been warm. The floors were polished marble and my footsteps made an echo that felt too loud in the empty space. I called out a greeting. No one answered. I took a breath and stepped farther into the foyer. A note rested on a small table nearby, held down by a silver paperweight. It said to head left and enter the kitchen. I followed the instructions, turning left into a long corridor lined with tall mirrors on one side. I avoided my reflection. Something about that hallway felt off. My eyes kept sliding to the mirrors, expecting to see movement, but I only saw my own body passing by. I didn't see anyone else. At the end of the corridor, I found a door that led to the kitchen. Inside, I saw an impressive setup. The counters were smooth granite, the appliances looked brand new, and there was every tool I could imagine. A single overhead lamp lit the center island. The corners of the kitchen were in deep shadow. There was a small note on the counter with instructions about how the client wanted each dish prepared. The handwriting matched the note I got in the mail. The list included a starter, a main course, and a dessert. Everything was clear and detailed. I started unpacking my knives and spices. I double-checked all the ingredients. Everything seemed top quality and fresh. It made my job easier, so I tried to focus on that. Still, I couldn't ignore the empty feeling in the mansion. I expected staff or maybe a butler, but the whole place felt abandoned. While I rinsed vegetables in the sink, I thought I saw a shape move past the doorway. I leaned forward and glanced around, but I saw no one. The air felt colder near the doorway, so I shifted my focus back to the food. As I chopped onions, I heard soft clicks against the floor somewhere behind me. They sounded like footsteps, but not steady ones. I stopped chopping, turned around, and saw nothing. The corners remained dark, but I didn't see a single person or even a shadow. I hesitated for a moment, then went back to cutting. My heart was beating faster than normal. I tried to keep a steady hand on the knife. While I boiled pasta for the starter, I heard another noise near the pantry. It was a faint shuffling sound, like fabric brushing against a door frame. I paused again and stared at the pantry door. It stayed closed. I watched it for a few seconds, waiting for it to move. It stayed still. I returned to my work. My mind was racing, but I forced myself to think about the sauce and the timing of the main course. I had a job to do, and I didn't want to mess it up. The pay was high, and my professional pride kept me going. Every few minutes, I sensed a presence in the corner of my vision. I would turn my head, and there would be nothing there. No figure, no shape, no shadow. Still, I felt watched. My arms got goosebumps. My mouth felt dry. I took a sip of water and tried to concentrate. I repeated each step of the recipe in my head. I arranged the plates carefully. I kept my eyes down on the plating when I felt another rush of cold air at my back. When I finished cooking, I carried the dishes out to the dining room. The table was massive, with at least a dozen chairs. There was one chair set at the head, where the table had a single place setting. The cutlery reflected the chandelier's light. I placed the starter on that plate. The seat was empty, of course. I glanced around, expecting to see someone step in at any moment. No one came. I walked back to the kitchen to grab the main course. My heart was still pounding. I inhaled slowly, trying to calm down. I carried the steaming plate into the dining room. Again, I found that same empty seat. There was no sign of any person. I set the plate down and stepped back. I waited a moment, hoping to see at least a hand or some sign of a guest. Nothing happened right then. I went back for the dessert, feeling my palms sweat. After setting the dessert on the table, I stood by the door. The silence pressed in. Then I heard the gentle clank of cutlery. I snapped my eyes toward the chair. I saw the fork lift off the table, but there was no hand holding it. I heard small metal taps as if the fork touched the plate. My breath got stuck in my throat. The pasta on the appetizer plate started to vanish, bite by bite. I didn't see it disappear in chunks, but the food simply reduced with each sound of a fork. I took a step backward. My knees felt weak. My arms tingled. I gripped the doorframe for support. The glass of water by the plate shifted and rose a few inches. I heard the faint sound of swallowing, but no shape. The main course began to vanish in the same way. The steak I had cooked was cut piece by piece, leaving the plate empty. I couldn't move my feet for a few seconds. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that floating fork. Eventually, I forced myself to shift my gaze to the walls, checking for any mirrors or cameras. I saw none. I returned my attention to the table when I heard the dessert spoon scraping the dish. The pudding I'd prepared was also disappearing. The entire meal was going away, as if eaten by an invisible guest. Then I heard a man's voice. It was low, smooth, and came from the empty chair. He thanked me by name. He complimented the flavors, the texture, the presentation. He said everything was perfect. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My heart hammered in my chest. He asked me to leave the bill by the candle on the far end of the table. I reached into my pocket, grabbed one of my business cards, and scribbled the amount due on it. My hands shook so much I could barely write. I walked over to place the card by the candle. I noticed a thick wad of cash already sitting there. It matched the fee we had agreed upon. I took the money, stuffed it into my jacket pocket, and tried not to drop it as I backed away. I said something like, "Thank you, sir." My voice sounded shaky and weak. The man's voice told me I could let myself out. I didn't see any figure rise from the chair, but I heard it shift slightly, as if a person leaned forward. I got the sense that he was watching me, but I couldn't see him. The whole scene felt impossible. My stomach churned. I turned around and hurried back through the corridor, not looking at those mirrors. I reached the foyer and left the mansion. The door closed behind me with a gentle click. In the car, I sat behind the wheel and tried to steady my breathing. My forehead was damp with sweat. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I drove away, glancing at the rearview mirror to see if anyone stood at the mansion's door. I only saw the large facade and the stone statues. No movement. I got home late that night, took a quick shower, and crawled into bed with the lights on. I couldn't sleep right away. My brain replayed the images of cutlery floating in the air. Eventually, I drifted off, but my sleep was restless. The next day, I tried to go about my normal routine. I still felt anxious. My thoughts kept returning to that empty seat. Late in the afternoon, I decided to cook something simple for dinner, hoping to calm down with a familiar activity. I sliced some vegetables and put them in a pan with chicken. My hands were steadier than the night before. I took measured steps with each ingredient, following a mental recipe I knew well. I set the table with a single plate in my small dining area. I tried to relax, listening to the sizzle of the pan. At least my own home felt more comfortable than that mansion. When the meal was ready, I carried the plate to the table and sat down. I cut a piece of chicken and brought it to my mouth, trying to focus on the flavor. A few bites in, I froze. I heard a scraping sound from across the table. There was no plate there, no chair set. But I heard the exact sound of metal on ceramic. My eyes darted to the empty spot. I saw nothing. My breathing sped up. My legs tensed, ready to jump away from the table. I tried to keep calm, telling myself it was my imagination. Then I heard the faint clink of a fork. I watched in disbelief as bits of food vanished from the pan on the stove. The lid was still off, so I could see the chicken pieces disappearing one at a time. My throat tightened. Sweat formed on my forehead. I pushed my chair back, got up, and walked to the kitchen. The food kept vanishing. I couldn't see a fork this time, but I heard the same quiet chewing noises and the occasional scrape of metal against the pan. My hands shook. A jolt of fear shot through me. It felt like that same presence from the mansion had followed me home. My mind scrambled for an explanation, but I found none. I felt a sick rush in my stomach. My mouth went dry. I stumbled backward until I hit the counter. Then I just stood there, listening to the sounds of invisible eating. Eventually, the noise stopped. The pan was empty. I stood in silence, staring at the place where the chicken had been. My thoughts raced, trying to find something concrete to do. I touched the edge of the pan. It was still warm, but most of the food was gone. I felt the muscles in my arms tense. My breathing was shallow. I tried stepping away, then I forced myself to walk around the house, turning on every light, checking every room. No one was there. Over the next few days, this kept happening. Whenever I cooked, something would remove the food from the pot or plate. Sometimes I would hear the gentle clink of unseen cutlery. Other times I would hear faint footsteps. I never saw a single outline of a person. The presence never spoke at my home. It just ate my food. I noticed that it seemed to happen only when I cooked something. If I ordered takeout or ate a sandwich, nothing occurred. But as soon as I prepared a proper meal, I felt that cold tension in the air. I heard the faint scrape of utensils. I watched my dishes empty themselves, one bite at a time. I started losing my appetite. My heart pounded every time I picked up a knife or lit a stove burner. I'd wipe sweat from my eyebrows while stirring a sauce, waiting for the moment that the invisible presence would start eating. It happened at random times. Sometimes it started right as I set the plate down. Other times I had already taken a few bites before the presence joined in. Each experience left me shaking, with my stomach twisted in knots. I tried to keep myself together, but it was impossible to ignore. I haven't gone back to the mansion. I haven't tried to contact the mysterious client. I'm afraid of what might happen if I do. But my reputation has grown because of that single job. Word got around that I made a private meal for a very wealthy patron. People started asking me for special requests. My phone rang more often with potential clients. I found excuses to turn them down. I don't want to relive that night. I can't forget how I felt when I heard that empty chair scrape across the floor, or when I saw the food fade from the plate without a visible hand. Now, every time I stand in my kitchen, I feel that cold spot behind me. Every time I hear a slight sound of metal on ceramic, I tense up. I haven't told anyone the full truth, I just say I'm taking a break. But the truth is, I can't stop cooking. It's what I do. Yet each new dish brings that familiar, creeping feeling that I'm not alone. I stand there, waiting for the first bite to disappear. I keep hoping it won't happen, but it does. And whenever I hear those ghostly utensils, I remember the man's voice thanking me back in that mansion. He said my cooking was perfect. I can't see him, but I know he's still around. And that knowledge makes my pulse pound every single time I pick up a knife. I never thought anything strange would happen here. I came to this lake for peace and quiet. I wanted a break from traffic noise, endless emails, and the usual chaos back home. I found a small ad for a cabin rental right at the water's edge. It was cheap, and the photos looked fine. I packed my car with a couple of bags, drove a few hours, and arrived just before sunset. I walked around that first evening and enjoyed the calm surface of the lake. There were no waves, no strong currents. It almost looked like a giant mirror. I felt relaxed. That was my first mistake. I assumed everything would stay normal. I noticed a soft breeze as I parked. The sun was going down and the sky glowed orange. I unlocked the door and stepped into a one-room cabin. It smelled a bit musty, like old wood and damp fabric. The floor creaked under my boots, and I felt a small gust of cold air against my legs. The rental agent had left the windows cracked open. I tossed my bag onto the only bed. It squeaked. The mattress felt thin under my hand, but I didn't mind. I just needed a place to rest. I set my phone on the nightstand. There was no signal. That didn't surprise me. I opened the closet. It was empty except for a single coat hanger. The walls looked clean enough. Then I checked the bathroom. It was a cramped space with a small sink, a metal-framed mirror, and a narrow shower. Everything looked fine. I stepped outside, sat on the short dock at the edge of the lake, and watched the last bit of daylight fade. The water was so still that I felt a strange urge to reach in and stir it up. But I just let it be. I remember hearing some faint rustling in the distance, maybe a raccoon rummaging in the brush. I heard the faint hum of insects. I breathed the cool night air until my eyes felt heavy. The next morning, I went out to the lake. The sun was up. The water was smooth again. I walked to the same spot on the dock and crouched down to wash my hands. I leaned forward, expecting to see my reflection. I saw nothing. The water was perfectly clear, but my reflection wasn't there. It just showed the blue sky overhead, the outline of trees on the far shore, and some reflected sunlight. I blinked a few times. I rubbed my eyes. Still nothing. I stuck my hand in the water and I saw ripples. The ripples made small circles on the surface. I still saw no sign of my face, arms, or anything else in the reflection. My heart pounded. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I couldn't explain it. I tried different angles. I checked if maybe I was standing in shadow or if the sun was at some weird position. I still saw no reflection. I walked back to the cabin, my arms feeling cold. I felt a knot in my stomach. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was still sleepy. I made coffee on the small stove inside. I drank it fast and decided to step back out, determined to see if things went back to normal. I crouched down at the water's edge again. Same problem. No reflection of me. That entire day, I tried to distract myself. I took a short walk around the property. I sat on a folding chair next to the cabin with a book in my hand. I flipped through a few pages, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting toward the lake. I wondered if I was losing my mind. I felt waves of tension in my chest. My shoulders felt stiff and my throat was dry. I considered leaving, but I had paid for the rental and I was too stubborn. I decided to stay. The next morning, I woke up early. My neck hurt from sleeping on that thin pillow. I heard a light tapping sound outside. It could have been branches against the cabin, but it felt too consistent. I dressed quickly in jeans and a jacket, then went outside. The air was chilly. I took a few steps toward the water. The tapping sound stopped. I leaned over the dock, squinting down at the surface. This time I saw something. A face stared back at me, but it wasn't mine. It belonged to another man. He had short, dark hair and a pale complexion. His eyes were wide, and he looked desperate or scared. I could see his mouth open, but I heard nothing. The face jerked, like he was trying to speak. Then the image vanished. The water was still again, and my reflection was nowhere to be seen. I felt sweat forming on my palms, and my breath went shallow. My throat tightened. I knelt on the dock, trying to see if he'd come back. I whispered, "Hello?" But I got no answer. No echo. Nothing. I touched the water, and it felt ice cold. The sun was out, so I expected it to be warmer. I jerked my hand away. I dried my hand on my jacket and stared at the still lake. The breeze brushed against my hair. The face didn't return. I stayed outside, pacing up and down the small shore. I kicked at small rocks. My mind was racing. I thought about driving away that minute. I felt a weight in my chest, and my heartbeat was too fast. Then I realized I had nowhere else to stay. I had about a week off from work, and I wanted some kind of break. I convinced myself to hold on and try to figure things out. I decided I would check the lake again around midday, just to see if something changed. At noon, I walked to the same spot. This time I saw multiple faces in the water. They weren't moving. I saw a woman with short blonde hair. I saw a man with a thick beard. I saw another face that looked older, maybe in his 50s, with deep lines on his forehead. Each face looked up at me. None matched my own face. I bent closer, and my stomach felt tight. I felt warmth rising in my cheeks, like I was about to panic. I forced myself to stay still. The faces all seemed silent, like they couldn't speak. Their mouths stayed shut, but their eyes tracked me. I heard nothing but my own breathing. Then the water rippled, and the faces disappeared. I got up, my knees shaking. I walked back to the cabin, locked the door, and sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands were trembling. I pressed them against my thighs to steady them. I stared at the floor. I tried to figure out if this was some kind of trick. I had no idea who those people were. They looked human, not some weird illusions or distortions. I felt a sudden chill, so I found a sweater in my bag and pulled it on. I paced around the cabin, counting steps to calm myself. Eventually, the sun began to set. I closed the curtains and tried to distract myself with some music on my phone, but I had no signal for streaming, and I had forgotten to download much. So I just lay down on the bed with my mind racing. That night, I heard a quiet scratching sound near the front door. It felt rhythmic. Scratch, pause, scratch. My pulse spiked. I got up, heart pounding, and tiptoed to the door. I placed my ear against it. The scratching stopped. I grabbed a small flashlight from the nightstand and flicked it on. I slowly opened the door. Nothing was there. I pointed the beam around. The trees were still. I saw no footprints in the dirt. The lake looked calm. I shut the door again, but I didn't feel safe. A few hours later, I finally drifted off to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I heard voices outside. They were faint, but distinct. I jolted awake and sat up. My mouth was dry, and my heart was pounding. It sounded like multiple voices, all low and urgent, calling my name. They repeated it over and over in hushed tones. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't. I grabbed my flashlight again, opened the curtains a sliver, and peered out. I saw nothing except the silhouette of the trees and the faint glimmer of the lake. But the voices continued for a few more seconds before they stopped. I didn't sleep much after that. My eyes stayed open, scanning the walls of the cabin. I listened for footsteps or more voices. I heard a branch snap at some point. It made my stomach lurch, but after a while, everything went quiet again. When the first light of morning appeared, I got dressed and stepped outside. I looked at the lake and I tried to keep my distance. Even from a few yards away, I noticed movement in the water. It seemed like small ripples were forming near the center, but I couldn't see anything else. I walked to the dock again, though my legs felt heavy. The air was cold. I looked down. The water was clearer than ever, but my reflection was gone. In its place, I saw several faces. Some had their mouths open, but I heard no sound. Their eyes twitched and flicked around. I felt my hands shaking and my jaw was tight. I stepped back, almost stumbling. I forced myself to stay calm. I filled a bucket with lake water and carried it to the cabin. I wanted to see if the same thing would happen in a container. I set the bucket on the table. It just looked like water. I leaned over it, trying to see if a face would appear. Nothing. I felt a small sense of relief, thinking maybe the effect only happened at the lake. I left the bucket there, half expecting something to change, but it stayed normal. The rest of the day, I tried to keep my mind off the reflections. I prepared a small lunch with canned soup. I tried reading again, but everything felt tense. My shoulders were rigid, and my head started to ache. I walked around behind the cabin, looking for any sign of a trick or a hidden camera or something that might explain what was happening. I found nothing. There was only a narrow dirt path leading into the woods. I followed it a short way, but I got spooked by the quiet. It felt like all the usual forest sounds were gone. I didn't hear birds or squirrels. Just silence. I turned around and went back to the cabin. After dinner, the sun set quickly. I locked the door, closed the curtains, and turned on the small lamp. I sat on the bed with my back against the wall. My ears were on high alert. Every tiny creak from the wood made me flinch. Eventually, I heard the voices again. This time, they sounded closer. They called my name with more urgency, as if they were right outside the windows. My hands gripped the blankets. I felt my breathing speed up, and I swallowed hard. I turned off the lamp. I couldn't see outside, but I pictured shapes standing near the dock. Then I heard a knock on the door. A soft, slow knock. 3 taps. Silence. 3 taps again. I forced myself to speak. "Who's there?" I said. My voice cracked. No response. I repeated my question, louder this time, but I got nothing back except a faint shuffling sound. Then the voices started again, whispering my name. I stayed where I was, sweating, my stomach churning. After about 10 minutes, the sound stopped. When morning arrived, I felt exhausted. I heard birds again, which surprised me. I rubbed my sore eyes and stepped outside. I kept my distance from the lake at first, but something pulled me closer. I went to the dock and I felt my legs shaking. I looked down and saw the same faces. More had appeared. There were at least 5 or 6 of them. They stared at me with wide eyes. One of them opened his mouth and I heard a faint moan like a muffled plea. I jumped back, almost tripping over my own feet. I didn't speak to them. I felt terrified. My heart pounded so hard that I thought I might collapse. I went back to the cabin, paced around, and decided I couldn't handle another night. I gathered my belongings in a rush, shoving things into my bag. My head pounded. My hands shook. I felt anxious and queasy. I stepped out to load everything into my car. I glanced at the lake and I saw those faces still there, drifting, waiting, silently urging me to come closer. I threw my bag into the back seat, started the engine, and got out of there. Even as I drove away, I thought I heard voices. They sounded desperate. My rearview mirror showed the reflection of the cabin shrinking behind me. The water in the distance looked calm, too calm. My chest felt tight, and I kept my foot on the gas. I refused to stop until I was far away from that place. I don't know who those people were. I don't know why I saw them instead of my own reflection. I just know I won't ever go back. And sometimes late at night, I still think I hear them calling my name. I still remember the chill that crawled up my arms the moment I saw that hooded statue in the museum. I had walked through rows of old pottery and dusty armor, not caring much about anything else. But then I spotted this marble figure standing in a corner, separated from the other artifacts. Its face was hidden under a carved hood, and its body looked human enough, though the robe covered everything. I stood there staring at it longer than I should have, feeling my stomach tighten. It wasn't fear at first. It felt more like a pull, as if I needed to keep my eyes on it. I don't usually get stuck on things like that. I like history and old objects, but I'm not obsessed with them. Yet I couldn't walk away. I looked at the statue's hood, trying to see any details on the face. There were none. Just smooth marble where eyes and a mouth might be. Eventually, I tore myself away and continued my tour. But in the back of my mind, I kept picturing that shape. When I got home from the museum, I tried to push it out of my thoughts. I told myself it was just some old sculpture that caught my attention for a second. But a few days later, I started noticing something weird in my bedroom at night. I have a habit of reading in bed. My lamp is on the nightstand and my curtains are usually drawn. At first, I saw a dark outline in the corner, near the wardrobe. It was shaped like a person, with the top part looking somewhat like a hood. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. I switched on the overhead light. There was nothing there except my plain wall and the corner of the wardrobe. I tried to write it off as a shadow. Maybe the angle of the bedside lamp was creating an odd shape. But the next night I saw it again. It was closer to the door that time. I noticed it out of the corner of my eye. My heart jumped. I turned my head fast. It didn't move or vanish right away, so for a second I truly believed someone was in my room. My muscles tensed and my breath caught in my throat. I reached for the lamp and my hand bumped into my phone. It clattered onto the floor, making a loud noise that echoed in the silence. When I finally flicked the light on, the corner was empty. I got out of bed and checked the windows. They were locked. I peeked under the bed, feeling a little ridiculous, but I had to be sure. No one was there. I felt my palms getting sweaty. My scalp felt tight. I couldn't explain why I was shaking. Eventually, I settled down, turned off the overhead light, and tried to sleep. I had trouble relaxing. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that shape standing over me. The next few nights were the same. I didn't see it every time, but every now and then I caught a glimpse of that outline. Sometimes it was in the corner. Other times it seemed closer to the window. Once I saw it right by the foot of my bed. That one made me jerk up so hard I almost fell off the mattress. I fumbled for the lamp switch. My heart was pounding, and my mouth went completely dry. I checked everything again. The doors were locked, the windows were sealed. No sign of forced entry. I kept thinking about the statue. The shape in my room looked just like the hooded figure, only it was darker. It didn't shine like marble. It was more like a shadow, but with a solid outline. I tried to ignore it by staying in my living room. I left the TV on for background noise, hoping the chatter would keep me calm. I ended up falling asleep on the couch for a couple of nights. I woke up stiff and exhausted. My neck felt sore from the angle I was sleeping in. I went back to my room eventually because the couch wasn't good for me. But the shape appeared again, always in that silent way. It never made a noise. It never moved around in front of me. I only noticed it when I turned my head or blinked a certain way. Then it was there, standing still. I started turning on every light in my home. That seemed to help for a little while. I could still feel something, though. I'd be washing dishes in the kitchen and I'd feel a cold pressure on the back of my neck. I'd look over my shoulder and I'd see nothing except my sofa, coffee table, and the hallway leading to my bedroom. My hands would shake as I dried the plates. My pulse would race. I kept telling myself there was nothing there. One night I got up to use the bathroom. I was half asleep, stumbling through the hallway with the door closed behind me. When I flicked on the light above the mirror, I saw the hooded face instead of my own. It was so clear that I dropped the glass I was holding. It shattered in the sink. I jerked back and banged my knee on the cabinet. My teeth clenched at the pain. I looked up again. My reflection was back to normal. My hair was messy. My eyes were bloodshot. And there was no hood. I stood there panting, trying to collect myself. My knee throbbed, and my foot was on some shards of glass. But I didn't cut myself. I carefully picked up the broken pieces and threw them in the trash. The entire time, my chest felt tight, and my skin prickled. I didn't want to look in the mirror again, so I left the bathroom light on and went back to bed. The following morning, I decided to check on my mental state. I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating. I hadn't been sleeping well. My anxiety was through the roof. I searched the internet for stories about that museum piece, but I found nothing specific. I called the museum front desk, but they only confirmed it was a recently acquired statue from some old estate. They didn't offer any details about its history or significance. Their tone suggested they didn't know much, or maybe they thought I was a random, curious caller. I hung up feeling frustrated. I tried to think of logical explanations. Maybe my eyes were strained. Maybe my brain was overstressed, and it was conjuring these images because of that statue. I forced myself to go for a run. I'm not much of a jogger, but I needed some fresh air. I ran a couple of miles around the neighborhood, feeling the burn in my thighs and the sweat dripping down my temples. It cleared my head for a moment, but as soon as I came back home and stepped inside, the tension returned. I checked the corners of every room. Nothing was there. Still, my stomach felt tight, like I was expecting something to jump out at me. Later that week, I went to bed early, around 9 in the evening. I thought maybe a longer rest would help me reset. I turned off the lights and tried to focus on my breathing. I didn't see anything at first, but after a few minutes I noticed a dim shape near the closet door. It was that same outline, tall and hooded. I stayed very still under the covers, watching it. My heart beat so hard I could hear the thumping in my ears. The outline didn't move. It didn't approach me. And it didn't fade. It just stood there. The only noise in the room was the soft hum of the ceiling fan. My chest felt tight, and I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to exhale. My hands were shaking and the blanket was starting to feel too warm, but I didn't dare pull it away. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. My plan was to shine the phone's flashlight on the figure and see if it vanished. As soon as my screen lit up, the shape disappeared. I pointed the light around the room. Nothing. Just my dresser, the closet door, and the plain walls. My throat felt scratchy and I swallowed hard. I stayed awake for another hour, scrolling through useless social media feeds, trying to distract myself. A few days later, I walked by the bathroom mirror again. I caught a glimpse of the hooded face in the reflection. It was only for a split second, but my entire body froze. I felt a jolt in my chest. My vision blurred, and I had to grab the edge of the sink to keep my balance. When I looked again, it was just me. The hooded figure was gone. I splashed water on my face, rubbed my eyes, and walked out. I couldn't handle staying in the bathroom with the door closed. I left it open every time I went in after that. I tried inviting a friend over just to have someone else in the apartment. My friend sat on the couch and we watched TV. He didn't see anything odd. We had a few beers, talked about random stuff, and I didn't mention the statue. I wanted to see if he'd notice anything on his own. He didn't. No shape in the corner, no weird reflections. I nodded along as he talked, but my eyes kept drifting to the hallway. I was waiting for that silhouette. It never showed up while he was there. After he left, I locked the door and did my usual routine of checking the windows. Everything was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was around, waiting for me to be alone again. That night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. I wasn't sure why. My throat felt dry, so I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand. In the darkness, I noticed a faint outline near the foot of my bed. My pulse shot up. My chest tightened, and I found myself gripping the sheets so hard my knuckles hurt. The shape was the same as before. The height of a person with a slight bulge at the top where the hood would be. I leaned over and turned on the lamp. It disappeared immediately. But now I was wide awake, staring at the empty space where I had seen it. My heart rate stayed high and my legs felt tense, ready to leap up if something moved. I kept the lamp on for the rest of the night. I dozed off once or twice, but woke up from my own twitches. In the morning, I paced around the apartment muttering to myself. I felt a constant pressure at the base of my skull. My eyes stung from lack of sleep. I couldn't keep living like this. I decided to revisit the museum, thinking maybe I'd learn something new if I saw the statue again. I arrived that afternoon, paid for a ticket, and found my way to the antiquities section. The statue was still in the same corner. Nothing looked different. I approached it carefully. A guard gave me a quick glance but didn't say anything. I stood in front of the statue, arms crossed, looking for any inscription or plaque. There was only a small label with minimal information. Unknown origin, marble hooded figure. No dates or background. I stared at it until my eyes watered. The hood covered its head, just like before. The surface of the marble was cold and pale. There was no sign that it could move or change. It was just a statue. I stepped closer and touched the edge of the base. The guard cleared his throat and told me not to touch. I apologized and stepped back. I wanted to ask him if he'd seen anything strange about it, but I felt embarrassed, so I just walked away. Since then, the figure in my room hasn't stopped appearing. It shows up less often than before, but it's there enough to keep me on edge. I can't ignore it. Every time I see that dark outline, I feel my muscles tense. I hear my breath catch in my throat. My forehead gets damp. It's always silent, always in a corner or near the furniture. When I turn the lights on, it vanishes. I haven't seen anything else in the mirrors lately, but I avoid looking at them in dim lighting. I brush my teeth with the bright overhead light on. I try to keep my eyes on my own face. I've considered moving, but I'm not convinced that will fix the problem. What if this thing follows me? What if it's something that got attached to me at the museum? I have no proof, no explanation. I haven't told many people. Most of my friends would just suggest therapy or medication. I'm holding it together for now. I go to work, I come home, and I deal with the occasional sight of that shape. Some nights I sleep through without seeing anything. Other nights, I wake up feeling certain that someone is watching me. I don't know if it will ever stop. I've tried ignoring it, I've tried chasing it by leaving the lights on, and I've tried confronting that statue again. None of it changed anything for good. There's no trail of footprints, no broken locks, no physical signs of an intruder. But every few days I'll wake up, look across my room, and notice that still, hooded outline. And each time, I feel the same fear rush through my body, making my skin cold, my heart pound, and my mind race. I keep searching for answers, but all I've got is this shape standing in the dark, and the memory of that marble figure in the museum. I remember how confident I felt when I packed up my gear and drove out to this forest. I always thought I was prepared for anything. I've gone camping in a lot of different places, but I've never experienced silence like this. On the first day, I walked a few miles in, set up my tent, and sat outside to eat some trail mix. That's when I realized something was off. There were no birds around, no crickets, no wind passing through the branches, just a stillness that felt heavy on my ears. Every time I moved, even the crunch of my boots on the dirt sounded too loud. My own breathing bothered me. I tried to shrug it off, but my chest felt tight. I spent the afternoon gathering wood for a small fire. The ground was damp in some spots, and I almost slipped a few times. The soil felt loose under my feet, like it hadn't been touched in ages. I checked my map a few times to confirm my location. I wasn't lost, but I didn't see any familiar landmarks either. I only saw dense trunks lined up in every direction. Their bark was dark, and the branches were thin and crooked. Even in broad daylight, they looked strange. I didn't see any small animals scurrying around. I didn't even see bugs. Usually, I have to brush away mosquitoes, but I didn't feel a single bite. I tried to relax after setting up my site. I lit a small fire, but the flames didn't give me comfort. The crackle sounded strange in that kind of silence. I tried to listen for anything that might explain the lack of wildlife, but I only heard my own heartbeat. My pulse felt loud in my ears. Even my swallowing seemed to echo in my head. I tried to distract myself by checking my supplies and organizing my food, but my nerves were rattled. I felt a twist in my gut like I might be sick. I forced myself to eat a protein bar and drink some water. The texture of the bar felt chalky, and I had to swallow hard to keep it down. That evening, the sun went down fast and the darkness was complete. I've camped in remote places before, but I could always see the sky or sense the open space around me. Here, the trees seemed to close in. When I aimed my flashlight around, I saw rows of trunks fading into blackness. The ground between them looked uneven, with shadows I couldn't interpret. I started to sweat, even though it wasn't hot. My forehead felt damp, and I had to wipe my palms on my pants. I tried to stoke the fire, but the flames seemed weak. The wood sizzled, and a thin smoke drifted up. My eyes stung from the smoke, and I coughed. That tiny noise felt overwhelming in the silence. I decided to settle in my tent early. I wanted the sense of enclosure, even if it was flimsy. Inside, I turned off my flashlight to save batteries. I lay there, listening to my own breath. My heart was still racing from the uncomfortable vibe outside. My sleeping bag rustled every time I shifted. The tent's nylon walls felt thin, like they offered no real protection. After a few minutes, I tried to calm down by focusing on simple tasks, like adjusting my pillow and tightening the sleeping bag around me. It didn't help. The silence pressed in. My ears started picking up the faintest sounds. Sometimes I thought I heard a snap of a twig or some leaves rustling, but whenever I held my breath to listen, the sound stopped. Eventually, I fell asleep, but I woke up in the middle of the night. I wasn't sure what time it was, but it felt like it had been a few hours. The darkness was still there, unchanged. My fire was out. I reached for my phone to check the time, but when I clicked the screen, the light hurt my eyes and I turned it off. I listened for any reason I might have woken up. At first, I heard nothing. Then, there was something faint in the distance. It sounded like footsteps. They were light, maybe spaced out by a few seconds. My breathing turned shallow and my pulse hammered in my neck. I tried not to make a sound. The steps seemed to move in a direction perpendicular to my campsite. I waited, counting each step. Then they stopped. My chest felt so tight I thought I might gasp out loud. I stayed still, trying to control the air in my lungs. I managed to drift off again after a long stretch of silence, but I woke up at dawn feeling sore and tired. My back ached, and my shoulders were stiff. As soon as I unzipped the tent, I noticed the cold air on my face. It smelled earthy and stale, like wet leaves that had been piled up for weeks. I stretched my arms and stepped out. My campsite looked normal at a glance, but I felt uneasy. I saw strange prints in the soft dirt near a cluster of small rocks. They didn't look like mine. I crouched down to check them. The shape was unclear, but the depressions looked fresh. I tried to match my boot to one of them, but it was different in size and pattern. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was maybe just an odd shape made by water, but the soil wasn't muddy enough for that to be the explanation. I made breakfast with my small propane stove. The hiss of the stove was the only sound I heard. There were still no birds singing, no squirrels running around. I ate in silence, just chewing oatmeal out of a metal cup. Then I decided to do a short hike around the area. I wanted to see if there was any sign of a stream or a clearing. I followed a narrow path that I found behind some heavy brush. It led me deeper into the forest. The tree density was even higher. The trunks were close together and I had to duck under low branches. The further I went, the more I felt a tingling under my skin. My scalp prickled, and I kept turning around to see if anyone was behind me. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. Sometimes I heard faint cracks in the distance, like something stepping on dead wood. Every time I tried to follow the sound, I ended up stumbling over roots or stepping into a small dip in the ground. After about an hour, I found a spot that looked like an old campsite. The remains of a fire ring were scattered on the ground, with blackened rocks in a loose circle. I kicked at one of the rocks. It shifted and revealed damp ash. It didn't look recent. The ash was gray and hardened around the edges. There were no footprints or signs of gear. I crouched and picked up a piece of burnt wood. It crumbled in my hand. I tossed it aside, feeling a jolt of paranoia. Someone had camped here once, but why had they left the ring scattered like that? Did they leave in a hurry? The silence kept me from thinking too hard about it. My stomach was tense. I realized I was sweating again, even though the temperature was mild. I decided to head back to my own campsite. The walk back felt longer. I tripped on a root and nearly fell forward. When I recovered, my heart pounded like I'd just had a close call on a highway. My throat was dry. I stopped to sip water from my canteen, and the sound of me swallowing echoed in my head again. I tried to clear my throat, and my cough sounded harsh. I looked around, but I saw nothing alive in the trees. The branches looked twisted in some places, and the bark was rough to the touch. I got a few splinters when I grabbed a trunk to steady myself. I pulled them out, wincing at the quick pinch of pain in my fingertips. Back at my campsite, I found everything in the same place I left it, but it felt different. The ground under my tent looked slightly disturbed near the edges, like someone had been poking around the tent stakes. I checked them and they were still solid, so maybe I was imagining things. I decided to build a fire again, just to keep my mind occupied. I also wanted the smoke to maybe signal that I was there, in case anyone else was wandering around. While I gathered more wood, I kept hearing those small snaps in the distance. My nerves were on edge. My hands shook when I carried the branches back to the fire pit. By late afternoon, I realized I couldn't stay out here another night without trying to figure out what was going on. I kept thinking I might run into another camper or a ranger, but I'd seen no one. I'd heard those footsteps, though, and sometimes what sounded like low voices, but they were too distant for me to catch any words. I started to suspect I might be dealing with other people who were just messing with me. Maybe they were hiding in the trees, waiting for me to drop my guard. My imagination was going wild, but nothing about this place felt friendly. The stillness made me feel like I was inside a sealed container. My lungs felt tight. My neck felt stiff. As the sun started to set again, I tried to calm my nerves by making a bigger fire. The flames rose a bit higher this time, and I fed them every few minutes. The crackling was steady, and it helped cover the silence. Darkness crept in again. I sat on a small folding chair, shining my flashlight around every time I heard a noise. The beam of light caught glimpses of trunks and twisted branches, but there was no clear shape of any person or animal. I got up once to investigate a soft, rustling sound near the edge of my campsite. I found a half-broken branch dangling from a low tree limb. It swung a bit when I touched it, but I saw no reason for it to have moved on its own. My nerves were raw. My fingers felt numb from gripping the flashlight so hard. I didn't want to go in the tent right away. I decided to stay awake longer. I tried to chew on some jerky, but my stomach felt too tight. My throat was dry, and I just couldn't force the food down. I drank some water, but it tasted stale. I noticed my shirt was damp with sweat, even though the temperature had dropped. My muscles felt tense, like I was ready to run. My mind kept racing with images of someone peering at me from behind the trees. Whenever I thought I saw a shape in the corner of my vision, I'd snap my head in that direction. But there was nothing. Eventually, I had to lie down in the tent. I left my flashlight within arm's reach. I tried to keep the zipper closed at the top, but not all the way, so I could peek out if I heard something. I stayed awake, listening to the crackle of the fire outside. At some point, I heard the distinct crunch of footsteps again. They were slow, and they seemed to circle the campsite. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and pointed the beam around. My fire was still glowing a bit, giving off enough light to see a few feet beyond the ring of stones. But I saw no one. My arms were trembling, and my chest felt tight. My breath sounded loud in my own ears. I yelled out, "Who's there?" and my voice sounded shaky. No answer came back. I only heard my fire crackle and my heartbeat pounding away. I stayed half in, half out of my tent for several minutes, aiming the flashlight in different directions. After a while, I convinced myself that whoever was out there had moved on. I zipped the tent shut again and tried to sleep, but my nerves were shot. My back tensed up, and I felt a dull ache in my ribs from breathing too shallow. The night dragged on. Every small noise made me jolt. Eventually, I dozed off from sheer exhaustion. When morning light finally came, I felt relieved. I stepped out of the tent and looked around. My fire was a pile of cold ashes. The air felt damp. My shoulders were stiff, and my eyes burned. I decided I couldn't spend another night there. I packed up my gear in a hurry. I stuffed my tent into its bag and jammed everything else into my backpack. My hands shook the whole time. My gut told me to get out as fast as possible. I didn't eat breakfast, I just kept moving. I followed the same path I'd taken when I arrived. The forest seemed even denser on the way out. I barely stopped for breaks. My feet were sore, and I felt twinges of pain in my calves. I stumbled a few times, but I forced myself to keep going. The silence was the same except for the sound of my boots and my ragged breathing. At one point, I thought I heard a distant voice again, a low murmur drifting between the trees. I didn't stop to check. After about 2 hours, I reached my truck. I threw my stuff in the back seat, started the engine, and rolled out of there. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. The drive out was bumpy, and I hit a few potholes that made me grit my teeth. Once I got on the main road, I felt some of the tension leave my body, but my heart was still beating fast. My mouth felt dry, and my shirt was soaked in sweat. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something behind me, but the road was empty. I don't know what I heard out there, or who it was. I didn't see anything concrete, but the complete silence, the strange prints, and those footsteps at night shook me up. I've never felt so watched in my life. I love nature, and I usually feel safe in the woods, but not in that forest. I'm not planning to go back anytime soon. I still get tense when I think about those nights. It felt like the forest itself wanted me gone, like it was rejecting everything living. I have no proof of anything supernatural, but I know what I heard. I know how I felt. I can't shake the memory of that emptiness pressing on my ears and the light steps circling my tent. I'm just glad I got out before I lost my nerve completely. Now that I'm home, I can breathe normally again. But whenever I close my eyes at night, I still imagine that dense canopy above me blocking out the sky, and that quiet that made my heart beat louder than I ever knew it could. I remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't alone in that old place. It was my second night there, and I was in the middle of unpacking when I saw that first envelope on the floor by the front door. It had my name on it. I hadn't told anyone my new address yet. I hadn't even updated my mail forwarding. Still, there it was. This plain white envelope with no postage, no return address, and my name typed on the front. As soon as I picked it up, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt wrong. I opened it slowly and unfolded a single sheet of paper that said, "I know what you did yesterday. I saw you struggling with that old trunk. You cursed under your breath at least 4 times. Careful with your back." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Nobody had been around while I lugged that trunk from the back of the van into the living room. At least I hadn't seen anyone. I stood there for a while, just staring at those words. My heart hammered so hard that my fingers felt numb. Eventually, I refolded the note, tucked it back in the envelope, and stuck it in my back pocket. I tried to brush it off as some weird prank, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that rose in my stomach. I thought about calling a friend, but it was late and I couldn't find my phone in the mess of boxes. I figured I should at least finish unpacking for the night, or maybe just go to bed and deal with it in the morning. But my mind kept drifting back to that letter, so I decided to look around the house and see if any windows or doors were unlocked. The house was old, and the previous owner had left behind a lot of stuff. There were boxes stacked in the second-floor hallway, dusty suitcases in the attic, and a few sealed crates in the basement. I'd been too tired to sort through everything. The front door had a flimsy lock, which I'd planned to replace soon. I tested the windows and found that most of them were stiff from years of neglect. They didn't open easily, and the ones that did had warped frames. The entire place felt damp. My footsteps on the wood floors echoed in the silence. The walls seemed thin, and I could hear the faint drip of a faucet somewhere upstairs. Every small creak set me on edge. I didn't sleep well that night. When I finally settled down on the old mattress I'd dragged into the only clean bedroom, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. My mind raced with thoughts of who could be watching me. Every time the house made a noise, I sat up, heart racing. By morning, I was groggy and irritated. I almost convinced myself the whole thing was just some strange coincidence. Then I remembered the exact wording of the letter. It mentioned details only someone physically present could have known. I got dressed and headed downstairs, hoping for some fresh air. I found a second letter under the door as soon as I stepped into the living room. This envelope was almost identical. Plain white, no postage, my name typed on the front. My mouth went dry. I knelt down and picked it up. My hand shook a little as I opened it. This time, the letter read, "You look tired. You won't find your coffee in the same place you left it last night. Check the box near the sink." And that sentence made my spine tingle. I'd left a small bag of coffee grounds on the kitchen counter. I was positive about that. I walked into the kitchen and saw that the counter was empty. My boxes of kitchen supplies were piled in a corner. I rummaged around for a minute and found the bag in one of the boxes near the sink. My skin felt cold, like a draft had swept through the house even though no windows were open. I told myself I was going to call the police, but what would I say? That I got 2 letters from a stranger who seemed to know personal details about me? There was no direct threat. There was just this sense that someone was sneaking around my house at night, or maybe watching me through the windows. I still felt jumpy. I brewed coffee, but my hands shook when I tried to pour it. I spilled a bit on the counter, cursed to myself, and wiped it up with an old rag. The day stretched out in front of me, and I felt too uneasy to focus on anything. I paced around, checking the closets in the basement. I found more boxes labeled with the name M. Hughes, which I assumed belonged to the old resident. Inside some of those boxes, I saw dusty clothes, old letters, and random knickknacks. But there was one box that held a stack of envelopes all addressed to me. None had stamps. None had been opened. None looked new. I slid the stack onto a nearby table and sorted through them. Every single one had my name typed on it. Some were dated last year, some had no date. I opened the one on top. It said something about a trip I took to the mountains 6 months ago. It mentioned how I got lost for 2 hours and never told anyone because I was embarrassed. My hands started sweating. I couldn't breathe normally. Whoever wrote this knew something only I knew. I ran my fingers over the words, feeling the slight indentations from the typewriter or printer that produced it. This wasn't some casual guess or bit of gossip. It was a precise account of what happened. And these letters had been inside a box in this house long before I'd arrived. I read through a few more, and each letter described events that happened at some point in my life, things I never shared. One letter talked about the time I chipped a tooth while opening a beer bottle with my teeth. I was in college then, and I never told anyone the truth about how it happened. Another letter referenced that brief stint I had working in a warehouse. I only told my close friend about that job. How did these letters exist here, in a place I'd never been? I felt nauseous. My chest tightened, and I realized I needed air. I ran outside, stood on the porch, and tried to steady my breathing. The morning sun felt too bright. I glanced at the house next door, but it looked empty. The yard was full of overgrown weeds. I heard a distant car passing by, but otherwise the street was quiet. My heart thumped against my rib cage. I wondered if someone was watching me from one of the upstairs windows. The thought made me shiver. I stepped back inside and locked the door behind me. For the rest of that day, I tried to ignore the letters. I moved furniture, tried to organize my possessions, set up my TV, and made a half-hearted attempt to tidy up the living room. I kept glancing at the front door, waiting for another envelope to appear. My head felt cloudy. My eyes drifted to the old boxes that the previous owner left. Part of me wanted to tear through every single one and see what other surprises were hidden. Another part of me wanted to set them all on fire. I resisted both impulses and kept pacing around. By late afternoon, I heard the mailman drop something into the mailbox outside. I went out and checked. There was only a takeout menu. No sign of the letters. I felt equal parts relief and disappointment. When the sun began to set, I decided to fix something simple for dinner. I still had some bread, some cold cuts, and mustard in a cooler. I made a sandwich and ate standing up in the kitchen. The quiet in the house made my ears ring. The smell of old wood and damp cardboard reminded me I wasn't comfortable here yet. My eyes darted to the living room entrance, expecting to see another envelope on the floor. It came after dinner. I walked into the living room and nearly jumped when I saw that white envelope by the door. My chest felt heavy. I approached it like it might explode. I bent down, my knees tight, and picked it up. I opened it there on the spot. "You didn't find everything in those boxes," it said. "Check the attic again, far corner, under the loose floorboard. I'll be watching." My hand shook and I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I swallowed hard and looked up at the ceiling. I didn't want to go back to the attic. It was cramped, dusty, and full of junk. But I needed to know what was under that floorboard. I climbed the stairs slowly. Every step creaked. The door to the attic stuck a bit and I had to shove it open with my shoulder. The smell of dust filled my nose. I used the flashlight on my phone. I made my way past the piles of boxes, old furniture, and a broken mirror leaning against the far wall. My heart thumped so loud I could hear the rush of blood in my ears. I reached the far corner and saw a small rug. I kicked it aside and found a section of floorboard that was slightly raised. I wedged my fingers underneath and pried it up. It made a splintering sound and dirt and debris crumbled into the gap. Inside, I saw a small wooden box with a latch. I lifted it out carefully, set it on a dusty trunk, and flipped open the latch. Inside, there were more envelopes. My name was on all of them. One envelope was thicker, sealed with a bit of old wax. I opened it and saw pages of text describing my next few days. I skimmed through it, feeling my stomach twist. It said that tomorrow I would try to call the police, but then hang up before the call went through. It said I'd consider leaving the house but would decide to stay. It outlined a plan I hadn't even formed yet, describing how I'd start searching the neighborhood for clues. My chest tightened. My mind raced. The words were on the page, typed out in black ink. Every next move I might make, every thought I might consider. It felt like I was reading a script that someone had already written for me. I slammed the box shut and stood up too fast. My vision blurred for a second and I stumbled backward, kicking up a cloud of dust. I coughed and staggered away. I left the box behind and got out of the attic as quickly as I could. Once I was back in the hallway, I locked the attic door behind me. My heart pounded. My hands were clammy. I took a moment to calm down, but it didn't help much. I spent the next few hours in the living room, lights blazing. I sat on the couch, scanning the windows and listening for any sound outside. My phone said it was close to midnight. I had a headache and my shoulders felt tight. My legs bounced nervously. I stared at the front door, wondering if another letter might slide under it. I checked all the locks twice, then sat back down. I thought about calling someone, but who would believe me? If I called a friend, they might think I was losing it. If I called the cops, I'd have to show them the letters. They'd probably dismiss it as a prank or ask me if I was sure I didn't have a stalker. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Eventually, I went upstairs and tried to sleep. It took me hours to drift off. I lay there, fully dressed on top of the blankets. My mind replayed the words from that thick envelope. I kept imagining a pair of eyes watching from the window or peering through a crack in the door. My jaw was tense and I kept clenching my teeth. When I finally slept, I dreamed of footsteps creaking down the hallway. I shot awake around dawn. My throat was dry and my neck was sore. I listened hard for any movement, but the house seemed still. I got up, walked downstairs, and found exactly what I expected on the floor. Another envelope. I braced myself before opening it. My fingers felt stiff. The note said, "You're going to open the box again tonight. You'll learn something you wish you hadn't. I'll be waiting." That was all. I crumpled the paper in my hand and felt a surge of anger. I wanted to tear the house apart, to shout at this intruder to show themselves. But I just threw the crumpled note on the floor and kicked it aside. My stomach felt like it was churning. I got dressed in a hurry. I grabbed my wallet, phone, and keys and rushed outside. The morning air was chilly. and my breath came out in clouds. I locked the front door and walked down the porch steps. I needed to clear my head. I strolled around the neighborhood, noticing how abandoned most of these houses looked. Peeling paint, boarded up windows, untended lawns. I didn't see a single person. Every few minutes I glanced over my shoulder, paranoid that someone might be following me. My heart raced whenever I heard a rustle of leaves or a distant car engine. I must have walked for close to an hour. By the time I got back, I was shivering. I climbed the porch steps, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The living room was the same as I left it, except for the fact that the crumpled envelope was gone. The floor looked bare. My eyes darted around, checking corners and shadows, but I saw no one. My throat felt tight. I closed the door behind me and locked it. My chest rose and fell with shaky breaths. Someone was coming in and out of my house, leaving no trace except these letters. They knew things about me that nobody else could possibly know. That's when I heard a sound from upstairs. It was like a muffled thump. Maybe something dropped on the floor. I froze, hardly breathing. My pulse pounded so loud I thought my eardrums might burst. I stood in the living room for a solid minute, trying to decide what to do. Then I took a step forward, ready to call out, but I couldn't form the words. The house felt alive, watching me. I checked the stairs, saw nothing, and stepped onto the bottom step. I tested each stair with my foot, terrified that it would creak. My body tingled with adrenaline. My hands were clammy. About halfway up, I heard another noise, like something scraping against the floor. I stopped, leaning against the banister, struggling to keep my breath quiet. Then there was silence. I swallowed hard, continued up, and reached the top. The hallway was empty. The attic door was still locked. The bedroom doors were closed. I felt along the wall for the light switch. The overhead light flickered a bit before it settled. Everything looked normal, except for the tension in my gut. I stepped toward my bedroom. The door was open an inch. I remembered closing it when I left. A chill ran through my body. I pushed the door open. Nobody was there. The bed was rumpled from where I'd slept, and my pillows were on the floor. I scanned the corners, the closet under the bed. Nothing. I stood in the silence, feeling the floorboards under my feet. Then I heard the sound of an envelope sliding under the front door downstairs. My heart skipped a beat. My hands shook. I backed away from the bedroom, moved into the hallway, and stared at the attic door. Should I check inside there again? My mouth felt dry as sand. I decided to go back downstairs. My hands trembled as I gripped the railing. That last sound, the envelope hitting the floor, still echoed in my mind. I reached the living room and found, like every other time, a white envelope. I picked it up, opened it, and read one short sentence. I told you I'd be watching. I felt sweat trickle down my temples. I stuffed the note into my pocket and stared at the door. I had no idea who was behind it. I didn't know how they knew so much about my life. I didn't even know if it was a single person or something else entirely, but I knew this wouldn't stop. I could feel eyes on me every second I stood there, and that was enough to make me dread what might happen next. I arrived at the house on a cloudy afternoon. The sky looked gray and the breeze felt thick against my skin. The driveway was cracked, and weeds grew in every gap. I stepped out of my car and stood there for a moment, looking at the old place. I had just inherited this house from a distant relative. Nobody else wanted it. I figured I'd check it out, see if it was worth keeping. I walked up the steps. The front porch sagged under my weight. The railing felt loose when I touched it. The door was heavy and it stuck for a second before I managed to push it open. Inside, the air smelled stale, like a room closed for too long. Dust floated in the light that came through the windows, and the floor creaked with every step. I felt a chill crawl up my arms, but I tried to ignore it. I spent most of that first day walking around, opening cabinets, checking closets, flipping switches. Some lights worked, some didn't. The wallpaper in the living room peeled in a few spots, revealing old plaster underneath. I listened to the silence. It was strange. No buzz of a fridge, no hum of an air conditioner. Just a quiet emptiness. I found a few old photographs on a small table in the hallway, but they were nothing special. They showed blurred faces of people I couldn't recognize. I made a note to look at them later, then I wandered upstairs. The second floor had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a small door at the end of the hallway. I tried that small door, but it was locked. I twisted the knob a few times and pushed my shoulder against it, but it didn't budge. I checked my pockets for any old key I'd found downstairs, but I hadn't come across one. It was just a locked door in an old hallway. I felt a little uneasy about it, mostly because it was the only door I couldn't open. That night I slept in the least dusty bedroom. There was an old bed frame with a mattress that smelled a bit musty, but it was better than the floor. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed about dark corridors and locked doors, but I couldn't remember many details when I woke up. The next morning, I made it my mission to figure out how to open that door. I searched the entire house for a key. I opened every drawer, checked behind bookshelves, felt around under rugs and behind picture frames. After a few hours, I found a small metal key taped under a kitchen sink. It was tarnished and looked like it might fit a simple lock. I took it upstairs and tried it. The door clicked and the knob turned. The room was smaller than I expected. No windows. A single overhead light bulb hung from the ceiling. I flipped the switch, and it flickered weakly, casting a dull glow. All I saw at first was a stack of picture frames leaned against the far wall. There must have been at least 20 of them, all different sizes. The frames were ornate, with carved borders that looked expensive. Each had a brass plate at the bottom. The plates had names etched into them with dates next to each name. I recognized a few of the last names from the old photographs downstairs, so I figured they belonged to relatives who once lived here. But the strangest thing was that every frame was empty. No paintings, no photos, no sketches, just blank canvases. The surfaces looked clean, like they'd never been painted on at all. I could still smell old varnish and the faint scent of turpentine. It felt eerie seeing all those frames lined up against the wall, each with a name but no face. I picked one up. The brass plate read, Jonathan, 1883. The date meant nothing to me, but I felt curious about it. The canvas was smooth with no sign of age or wear. I propped it against the wall. I took another one. Eliza, 1910. Same situation, blank canvas, ornate frame, a little metal plate. It felt wrong somehow. I set it down again and left the room. I locked the door behind me and kept the key in my pocket. Later that afternoon, I decided to hang one of those frames in the hallway. I picked a random one, not too big. The plate had my own last name, but a first name I didn't recognize. It felt like it belonged to the house, so I wanted to see if it would look nice on a wall. I hung it on a nail by the staircase, adjusted it, and stepped back. It looked plain, just an empty white space inside a decorative gold border. I shrugged and went about my day. That night I lay in bed trying to read an old newspaper I found in the living room. The words felt faded. The paper smelled musty. I heard creaking on the stairs at one point, but I figured it was just the house settling. When I finally slept, I had strange dreams again. I saw the hallway in my mind, and that blank frame on the wall. Something moved inside it, a shadow or shape. I woke up sweating, but the room was cold. In the morning, I stepped into the hallway and glanced at the frame. At first, I thought I was imagining things. There was a faint outline in the center of the canvas. It was a smudge, almost like a blur of charcoal. I leaned in, feeling my heartbeat speed up. It looked like the start of a figure. It had a vague shape, like a torso and shoulders, but no clear features. I stood there, staring. My hands felt clammy. I tried wiping the frame's surface, thinking maybe dust had settled in a pattern, but my fingertips came away clean. I stepped back and took a deep breath. Then I went to the kitchen, made myself some coffee, and tried to push it out of my head. Throughout the day, I caught myself looking at the frame again and again. By late afternoon, the faint outline seemed more defined. I could see a rough suggestion of a face, maybe eyes and a mouth. My own face felt hot when I realized that the shape looked a bit like me. The hair, the posture. I got a shaky feeling in my chest and my stomach tightened. I rubbed my eyes, then looked again. The figure remained. It didn't move in front of me, but every time I turned my gaze away and looked back, it seemed a bit clearer. That evening, I decided to check the locked room again. I still had the key. Inside, those frames stood exactly as before, all blank. I felt jumpy, so I carried one of them downstairs to examine it. I placed it on the dining table and stared at it under the overhead light. It showed nothing, but the brass plate said, Henry, 1932. I felt no connection to the name, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something about these frames was alive. I hung this second frame on the opposite wall of the hallway. I wanted to see if the same thing would happen. The next morning, I woke up early and checked it. Sure enough, there was a faint shadow. It looked different, maybe taller or thinner, and it stood in a different spot on the canvas. My pulse kicked up again. It was like having two strange, incomplete mirrors in my house. Over the next few days, I noticed more changes. The first frame showed a clearer image of me. I recognized my jawline, my eyebrows, even the way my hair sat. It wasn't fully colored in, but I could see my own likeness in that shape. I tried to tell myself it was some odd coincidence. Maybe my brain was seeing patterns where none existed. But every time I walked by, I felt my heart pound. Sometimes I swore the figure shifted a bit, but I could never catch it moving when I looked directly at it. The second frame started showing something else. It looked like a person with long arms and a narrower face. I didn't recognize it as me. I couldn't place who it was, but it seemed to follow me with its eyes, even though I couldn't see pupils or details. It was more like the suggestion of a gaze. I found myself hurrying past that spot in the hallway. My palms felt sweaty and my breath caught in my throat. Soon I heard faint creaks during the night. I'd get up and walk around with a flashlight, but I never found anything out of place. However, the frames continued to fill in. By the end of the first week, both frames had distinct silhouettes. The first one looked like a near-perfect version of me, though a bit pale and lifeless. The second frame had a figure that seemed more shadowy and elongated. I couldn't take it anymore, so I went back to the locked room hoping to find answers. I noticed that the stack of frames looked smaller than before. I counted them, and a few were missing, but I hadn't removed them. I checked every corner of the house, searching for those missing frames, but I couldn't find them. My nerves were on edge. I felt tightness in my chest and tension in my shoulders. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. I felt my pulse race every time I heard a noise in the hallway. A few days later, I found another frame in the living room. It sat leaning against the couch, blank and waiting. I didn't remember bringing it down. Its brass plate read, Michael, 1954. I backed away from it, feeling my hands shake. Then I carried it back to the locked room, placed it inside, and shut the door. I stuffed a chair under the doorknob, hoping to keep it closed. But at night, I heard movement again. The next morning, I checked the corridor. Now 3 frames hung on the walls. The new one showed a vague shape, like a person standing with its head tilted. My breath caught in my throat. I reached out and touched the canvas. It felt cold, almost damp. I backed away, feeling my skin break out in goosebumps. I took down all 3 frames, stacked them in the living room, and draped sheets over them. Then I tried to focus on cleaning up the house, thinking maybe I was just letting my imagination run wild. But the atmosphere never changed. I still felt that pressure in the air, like being watched. Every time I turned around, I expected to see one of those frames behind me. I avoided going upstairs for a while. I tried to sleep on the couch, but I kept waking up to faint scraping sounds, like a frame being dragged across the floor. When I got up to check, everything seemed normal, yet I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. 2 days later, I walked into the hallway and saw the frames back on the walls. I don't know how they got there. I hadn't moved them. Each image looked more vivid than ever. My own face stared back at me from the first one. It seemed to have more color, almost flesh-toned. The second silhouette was sharper, and I could make out details in the hair and clothing. The third one looked like a person with dark eyes and a stern expression. I felt a chill across my neck. I tried to ignore them, but I could feel their presence. When I moved, I sensed the pictures behind me. My muscles felt tense, and my stomach churned with anxiety. I paced through the house, trying to distract myself. I opened windows to let fresh air in, but the stale smell lingered. I turned on every light, but the corners still felt dark. I caught my reflection in a mirror and noticed how tired I looked. My hair was messy, my eyes were bloodshot, and my shirt clung to my sweaty chest. I reached a point where I couldn't stand it anymore. I stormed up to each frame and tore it off the wall. My hands trembled as I ripped the canvases from the frames, but the surfaces refused to tear. It felt like trying to rip thick plastic. I managed to separate one corner, but that blank spot beneath it just looked the same. The figure on the canvas stared back at me, motionless but present. I threw the frames to the floor, stomped on them, but it was like stepping on solid wood. I only managed to dent one of the frames slightly. Frustrated, I gathered them up and ran outside to my car. I threw them in the trunk, slammed it shut, and planned to drive away. But I realized I was in my pajamas and didn't have my wallet. I rushed back inside to collect a few things, just to get away for a while and think. When I returned to the car, the trunk was empty. My chest tightened. I looked around, but no one was there. My mind raced. It felt like I was trapped in a place where nothing made sense. I went back inside, and that's when I saw all the frames lined up against the hallway wall again, as if waiting. My vision blurred for a second, and I felt dizzy. I leaned against the banister, trying to steady myself. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd pass out. I heard a soft scraping sound, and I glanced at the frames. One of them seemed to shift an inch to the side. I jumped back. My muscles tensed, and I started sweating all over. I thought about running out of the house, but my legs felt weak. My hands were damp, and my mouth felt dry. I looked at the frames once more and noticed that my own image seemed to be turning its head. The shoulders had rotated slightly, and the jaw was angled toward me. I felt my pulse in my ears. I turned away, walked toward the front door, and tried to keep calm. Every step felt heavier. Now as I stand here, I can see them out of the corner of my eye. They're on the wall behind me. I sense their gaze, like a weight pressing against my back. My hands are shaking as I tell this. I feel short of breath. The hallway seems narrower, and the floor creaks with every shift of my feet. I hear faint rustling, but there's no wind. When I look at the frames directly, nothing moves. But I know they're changing when I'm not looking. Every time I blink, I imagine them adjusting their poses, inching closer, filling in more details. I don't know what they want. I don't know why these canvases keep taking shape. I only know that they're here, and they're watching, and every day their figures become clearer. My face is on that first one, and I can't do anything to erase it. I can't destroy the frames. I can't even get them out of the house. I'm stuck here with them, and I feel them following me wherever I go. That's all there is. I'm in a constant state of tension, waiting for the next small change, the next shift in their positions. I don't feel safe anymore, even during the day. The house is quiet, but that silence feels worse than any noise. Every time I hear a creak, I freeze. My pulse spikes, and I look around, expecting to see one of those silhouettes in the doorway. This isn't a nightmare. It's real. I'm awake, and I can't escape these blank canvases that keep filling themselves with images I never asked for. I wasn't planning on seeing anything strange when I left my cabin that morning. I just wanted to walk a trail I'd heard about from a ranger weeks earlier. The ranger mentioned that it wasn't official, but it led through some remote areas where old farmland used to be. He said people sometimes found arrowheads or broken tools. That interested me enough to ignore the usual tourist paths. I drove out before sunrise and parked my truck on the side of a dirt road. The day started cold, so I wore a light jacket and made sure I had enough water and snacks. I felt a little excitement, the kind that comes with exploring somewhere off the map. I followed a narrow track that cut through tall grass and loose rocks. I noticed the lack of footprints, which told me not many people took that route. The trees were mostly pines and oaks, spaced far apart. I heard birds calling in the distance, some crows circling overhead. The ground smelled of damp earth. The air was cool and carried a faint hint of pine resin. At times I heard squirrels chattering. Apart from that, it was quiet. As the sun got higher, I kept looking for signs of old farmland. Maybe a collapsed fence or a patch of turned-over dirt that didn't match the rest. After a couple of hours, I saw broken wooden posts leaning at odd angles. The wood was rotten, but the shape suggested these posts had once been part of a gate or fence. Grass grew around them, tall and dry. Nearby, I noticed tire tracks, but they looked old, barely visible. They might have been from a tractor or maybe an old car. They ended abruptly near a cluster of rocks. I pushed forward. My legs felt strong. I knew I had energy to hike all day if I needed. I stopped to drink some water and ate a granola bar leaning against a tree. The taste of peanut butter felt good after the bland water. I heard a breeze rustle the leaves. My mouth felt dry, and I reminded myself to conserve my water. There was no clear stream around, just some dried creek beds further back. After a while, I spotted something unusual, a small mound of debris that looked like it might have been part of a building. I walked toward it. The ground was uneven, with holes where some animals had dug. I saw bits of rusted metal, a few shattered glass pieces, and rotted beams collapsed into a heap. It took me a moment, but I realized this might have been a barn or storage shed. The beams were thick, and the broken metal could have been pieces of farm equipment. I stepped around carefully, not wanting to cut myself or break an ankle in a hidden ditch. The place was silent except for the occasional breeze. Then I noticed something farther ahead, a larger structure with a partially collapsed roof. I couldn't see it fully from where I stood. I walked on, minding my footing. The building came into view. It looked like a farmhouse, old and ruined. Part of the roof was caved in. Most of the windows had no glass. The door was hanging off its hinges, leaning inward. The walls had peeled paint and large cracks. I walked around it, looking for anything recognizable. The front porch was sagging. A torn screen door lay flat on the warped boards. The place felt forgotten, like nobody had touched it in decades. I wondered who had owned it, why they left, and how long it had been sitting here. I didn't see any clear path for vehicles, just that faint fence line from earlier and the scattered debris. I stepped onto the porch, testing each board before shifting my weight. The wood creaked under me. My heart sped up a little because I wasn't sure if the porch would hold me. Inside, the air smelled stale and dusty. The floor was covered in debris, fallen plaster, broken furniture, and dead leaves. A shattered table leaned against a wall with stains that looked like mold. I saw a few holes in the walls, possibly from animals. A ripped curtain hung from a bent rod near a window that faced the fields. No light fixtures worked. The only illumination was the daylight seeping through holes in the roof and cracks in the walls. I took a few steps inside and felt my pulse quicken. Something about standing in that ruined house gave me a jolt of adrenaline. It wasn't fear exactly, more like unease. My ears picked up every small sound. My boots scraping against the grit, the rustle of my jacket, the slight whistle of the wind. I wanted to see if there was any sign of old photos, letters, or something that might give me a clue about the people who once lived here. But everything looked stripped and damaged. If there had been anything personal, it was long gone. I walked into what I assumed was the living room. A moldy sofa sat there, cushions torn open, stuffing spilling out. The floor felt unstable near the center of the room, so I stuck close to the walls. I glanced up and saw the rafters. Some were broken, letting beams of light shine in from the roof. Dust motes floated in the air. I coughed once, the dust feeling rough in my throat. After a few minutes of exploring, I heard a faint noise outside. It sounded like footsteps on dry grass. My neck tensed. I turned and looked out a window. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I spotted movement on the hill beyond the property. It looked like a person, maybe more than one, but they were too far away to see clearly. I felt a spike of concern, wondering if they were hikers, locals, or something else. I left the house through the front door, stepping carefully off the porch. I walked around the side of the building, hoping to get a better view of whoever I saw. When I reached the corner, I looked back toward the hills. I saw two figures standing still. They were wearing dark jackets or coats. I couldn't make out faces. They stood there, not moving, watching me. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. Something about their stillness got under my skin. My heart thumped harder. I lifted my hand in a small wave, trying to appear friendly. They didn't wave back. I considered calling out to them, but my throat felt tight. I waited, feeling uncertain. I decided to walk in their direction, at least to show I wasn't scared. But the moment I started moving, they turned and walked behind the ridge. It only took a few seconds for them to disappear. I felt my mouth go dry. I thought maybe they didn't want contact. Maybe they were shy or worried I might be trouble. Or maybe they were just curious. Still, it felt weird. I hadn't seen another soul all morning. This was a remote area. I considered leaving, but something inside me wanted to check that ridge. I wanted to see if they were just curious locals. I also worried they might be squatters protecting territory. My stomach knotted up at that thought. I didn't want any conflict, but my curiosity was stronger than my caution. I decided to head up the hill. I tucked my jacket closer, adjusted my backpack, and walked through the tall grass. The ground sloped, and I had to pick my steps carefully. Small rocks slid under my boots. The wind felt stronger up here. It whipped through the grass, making a shushing sound. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. My mind kept replaying the image of those figures standing so still, just watching. When I reached the top of the ridge, I found no one. I looked around, expecting to see them heading off in the distance, but there was nothing but rolling hills and patches of trees. I tried to spot footprints. The grass was tall, so it was hard to see anything. I paused, turning in all directions. Nobody was there. My arms tingled with nervous energy. That feeling of being watched crept up on me. I scanned the area one more time. Still nothing. I decided to head back to the farmhouse. I didn't want to wander too far without knowing who these people were or what their intentions might be. As I walked back down, I kept checking over my shoulder. The farmhouse came into view, looking even more rundown from this vantage. I noticed the collapsed roof section more clearly. The sun was higher now. The temperature had warmed up, but I still felt a chill under my skin. Back at the farmhouse, I circled around to the backyard. There were remnants of a small vegetable garden, rows of dried-out soil, and a few broken stakes in the ground. A rusted watering can lay on its side. Behind that, I noticed another building, smaller, possibly a tool shed. It was missing a door and the walls were partially caved in. Inside, I saw a few rusted tools, a broken ladder, and a spider web of cracks in the wooden walls. The sky was clear, bright blue. I heard a faint buzzing of insects. Otherwise, it felt too still. My senses were on high alert. My skin felt prickly. My stomach twisted, and I kept swallowing the dryness in my mouth. I decided I wanted to check the farmhouse a bit more, maybe go upstairs if it was possible. If I found nothing else of interest, I'd head back to my truck. I re-entered the house through the side door, which was missing most of its lower panel. The hinges screeched as I nudged it. The interior hallway was dark. I used the light from the open door behind me to guide my steps. The floor was littered with debris, broken plaster, rotted wood, and pieces of old wallpaper. I kept one hand on the wall to steady myself. The wall felt damp and cold. Toward the end of the hall, I saw stairs leading up. The banister was broken in places. Each step creaked loudly. I tested them carefully with my foot before placing my weight. My breath quickened and I felt sweat forming on my forehead, even though it wasn't that warm inside. I made my way up slowly. The second floor was smaller than I expected, maybe just 2 bedrooms and a tiny bathroom. The hallway upstairs had a small window with cracked glass. Light came in at a sharp angle. The first door on my left led to a bedroom with a collapsed ceiling. Part of the roof had caved in, letting in a lot of light and some scattered debris. I saw a rusted bed frame with no mattress. The floor around it was covered in old leaves, twigs, and bits of broken shingles. There was a stale odor of mold and damp wood. As I stepped in, I looked around for anything interesting, maybe an old trunk or a closet. I found a closet door hanging crooked on its hinges. It was empty inside, just more debris. The second bedroom was in better shape, though still trashed. The walls had large cracks and the floor was covered in dust. A broken dresser stood against one wall, its drawers missing. The window here overlooked the backyard. I went over to the window to see if I could spot anything. I was curious about those figures. The backyard looked the same. Quiet. Nothing unusual. I decided to check the bathroom. The door was jammed, but I managed to push it open. The fixtures were rusted. The tub was stained and chipped. There was no running water, of course. The smell of mildew was strong. I stepped back out, feeling a growing sense of unease. I realized I was alone in this broken house with no idea if those strangers would return. I heard a noise outside again, that same faint crunch of grass. My body tensed. I rushed to the window in the second bedroom and looked toward the hills. I caught a quick glimpse of movement, a figure darting behind a large boulder. My heart pounded. It felt like a jolt of electricity through my chest. My palms were sweaty. I wiped them on my pants, trying to calm my breathing. I weighed my options. I could leave right away, put distance between me and whatever was out there. Or I could try to confront whoever it was. I didn't like the idea of them following me if I left. I decided to step outside and call out. Sometimes direct communication is the best approach. I wasn't armed, but I had a decent pocket knife in my backpack. I didn't want to escalate anything, though. I carefully made my way downstairs, stepping over the creaky spots. I returned to the front yard. My legs felt stiff. The sun was bright, and I had to squint. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves. Then I yelled out, "Hello? Anybody out there?" My voice sounded strange in the open air. I waited, listening. Nothing, not a single reply. The only sound was the faint breeze. I walked around to the back of the house, scanning the hills. I saw no one. I moved to the side yard where some debris was piled. I checked behind a tall bush, but there was nothing except an old rusted bucket. Every step I took made me more alert. My heart felt like it was beating in my throat. The tension was building in my shoulders. The silence pressed on me. I kept glancing around, expecting to see someone pop up. After 5 or 10 minutes of searching, I gave up. Whoever it was, they didn't want to talk. I felt the weight of the situation. I didn't know these hills well, and I didn't know if these people were hostile. The smart move seemed to be leaving. I gathered my courage, walked back to the front of the house, and headed toward the spot where I initially entered the property. As I crossed the field, I felt like I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder every few seconds. My breathing was shallow, and my mouth felt dry. The grass rustled around me, and I listened for any sign of footsteps. Nothing. Just my own movement. My nerves were on edge, and my muscles felt tense. But no one appeared. That gave me a bit of relief, though I still had that tight feeling in my gut. When I got near the gate posts, I paused for one last look at the farmhouse. That's when I saw a lone figure standing on the porch. My heart jumped. The figure looked tall, dressed in dark clothing. They stood facing me. The distance was too great for me to see their face or any details. I froze. My hands twitched at my sides. I couldn't decide if I should call out or run. I took one step forward, and the figure moved inside, disappearing into the shadows of the house. I felt a burst of cold sweat on my brow. I didn't know how many people were in there now. I decided I wasn't going back. I took a few more steps toward the posts, then forced myself to turn away. I hurried off, retracing my path along the narrow trail I came in on. As I walked, I kept checking behind me. I expected to see someone following, but there was only the open grass. My pace got faster, and my breathing stayed shallow. I forced myself to slow down whenever I stumbled on loose stones. I didn't want to twist an ankle in my rush. My body felt wired, like every nerve was on alert. My hands felt clammy. The crunch of my boots on gravel sounded too loud. Eventually, I reached the area where my truck was parked. The sight of it gave me a flood of relief. I looked around carefully, making sure no one was lurking in the bushes or behind the trees. I still saw nothing. The day was quiet again, almost too peaceful for what I had just experienced. I got into my truck, locked the doors, and took a moment to calm myself. My thoughts raced, replaying the images, the two figures on the hill, the person on the porch, the sense of being followed. My chest felt tight. I started the engine, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The truck rumbled to life, and I pulled onto the dirt road, heading away from that place. I glanced in the rearview mirror several times, half expecting to see a dark shape behind me. All I saw was dust and the empty road. I drove for a while in silence, trying to let go of the tension in my shoulders. I passed the spot where the official hiking trails began, where I had once considered taking a different route. Part of me wished I had stuck to the well-traveled paths, yet another part of me felt drawn to find out more, though I wasn't about to turn back. Once I was far enough away, I pulled over to the side of the road, took a long drink of water, and tried to compose myself. My hands were still unsteady. My forehead felt damp. The air smelled of dust and dry grass, but I was away from that remote farmland. I told myself I'd done the right thing by leaving. I didn't have a good reason to stick around and risk a confrontation. If those people wanted their privacy, they had it. I considered the possibility of coming back with another person or letting the ranger know what I found, but in that moment, I just wanted to get home. The memory of those silent figures gave me an uneasy feeling. I had no proof they meant any harm. They never attacked me or even approached me, but their behavior was so strange, and that silent watching was enough to rattle me. I continued driving, focusing on the road. Once I reached a paved highway, I could finally breathe a bit more easily. The rest of the trip was quiet. I replayed everything in my head, from finding the farmhouse to seeing those silhouettes on the hill. I wondered who they were and why they disappeared whenever I tried to get close. Maybe they lived around there, squatting in that old building, or maybe they were just drifters. Either way, I didn't like how it all felt. By the time I got back to my cabin, it was late afternoon. I parked my truck and sat there for a while, engine off, windows down, feeling the breeze against my face. My heart rate was almost normal. My shirt clung to my back with sweat. I went inside, locked the door, and let my pack drop to the floor. My body felt heavy. I splashed water on my face and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, checking for any sign of scratches or bruises. I saw nothing except my own weary expression. That night, I tried to distract myself by making a simple dinner. I grilled a small piece of chicken and ate some canned vegetables. The food tasted bland, but it settled my stomach. I tried to watch some TV, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to that deserted farmhouse and those silent onlookers in the distance. Each time I thought about it, my heart rate ticked up. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there, eyes open, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling. My mind wouldn't let go of the day's events. I felt a mix of relief at being safe and an odd pull to find out more, but I knew I wasn't going back anytime soon. Eventually, I drifted off into a restless sleep. Since then, I haven't returned to that trail. Part of me wants to forget it altogether, pretend it was a bizarre fluke or my imagination. But I can't deny that I saw those people, and I can't ignore how real my fear felt when they vanished. I still wonder who they were and what they were doing in that ruined farmhouse. I have no answers, just the uneasy memory of a silent standoff in the hills. For now, I've chosen to stick to the more familiar trails. I haven't mentioned this to many people, just a couple of friends who shrugged it off. They told me maybe it was just other explorers, or maybe I got spooked by nothing. I doubt that, though. I know what I felt out there. I've never quite shaken the sensation that there was something off about that place, but life goes on. I keep telling myself I was lucky there was no confrontation. No one got hurt. Nothing happened, really, except that I saw people who didn't want to be seen. That's the whole story. I found a farmhouse in ruins, saw figures on the hills, tried to approach, and they disappeared. It still gets under my skin. I can't put my finger on why, but it does. Sometimes I think about going back with a friend just to prove to myself there's nothing weird about it. Then I remember that moment I saw the figure on the porch. My chest tightens every time. So for now, I'm content to leave it alone. Maybe one day I'll work up the nerve to return, but it won't be anytime soon. Until then, that forgotten place stays in my mind, a memory of silent watchers and a ruined farm that I can't quite shake. I noticed something strange the moment I set foot inside that cabin. The door squeaked in a way that felt off, like it hadn't been opened in weeks. The air inside was stale and slightly musty, and there was a faint odor that I couldn't pin down. At first I thought it might just be mold or dust. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor, tried the lights, and saw them flicker for a second before they settled into a weak glow. I had rented this cabin for a few days in a national park. I wanted quiet. My job had been stressful and I needed a break from everything. My phone, the traffic, the noise of the city. The photos of this place looked cozy enough. A small kitchen, a living area, a tiny bedroom in the back, and a porch overlooking tall pines. No internet, limited cell signal, and lots of trees. That was the plan. Right away, something about the living room felt unwelcoming. The furniture was old. The coffee table had rings from drinks left on it, and the sofa cushions were threadbare at the edges. I ran my hand over the top of the sofa and felt a slight dampness. I guessed it was from the humidity. I remember sighing and telling myself I'd just open a window to air it out. When I walked around, I noticed a small wooden desk in the corner. Its top was scratched and dusty. The desk had a single drawer with a rusty handle. I tried to open it, but it stuck. I gave it a harder pull and it slid open. That's when I saw the diary. It was an old spiral notebook, the kind you might buy in a convenience store. The cover was half torn, with a few scribbles on it. I couldn't make out the name. It looked like part of a name that had been scratched out. The edges were smudged with some kind of dirt. I was curious, but I didn't want to stand there and read it right away. I set it aside, brushed off the desk, and decided I'd deal with it later. I wanted to unpack and settle in first. The bedroom was smaller than I expected. The bed squeaked when I pressed down on the mattress. The sheets looked clean, though, which was good enough for me. There was a wooden dresser under the single window. Outside that window, I could see tall pines swaying a bit in the breeze. The sky was cloudy, and it looked like it might rain soon. I remember feeling a chill in the air, so I put on a thin jacket before I walked back to the desk. I sat down in the old chair and took a closer look at the diary. The first page had a date from a few months back. The handwriting was sloppy, but I could read most of it. It said something like, "I can't sleep again. I keep hearing something outside. I thought it was raccoons, but it sounds bigger. Last night I heard footsteps on the porch." That was all for the first entry. I flipped a few pages. The next entries were short, describing nights of hearing sounds in the woods. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, things like that. Then it got weirder. One entry mentioned scratching noises on the outside walls. Another entry described seeing movement in the trees around dusk. There were fewer details than I would have liked, but it sounded like the writer was scared. I felt uneasy reading this. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination, or maybe someone who was freaked out by wildlife. But the more I read, the more I got this knot in my stomach. The writer said they woke up one night and saw a shadow pass by the bedroom window. They claimed it moved like a person, but it didn't have any distinct shape. I remember looking over my shoulder after reading that. The cabin felt quiet. My ears rang a bit from the silence. I knew it was just me psyching myself out, so I shut the diary and decided I'd make something to eat. There was a small kitchen area with a mini fridge and an old microwave. The fridge made a buzzing sound, which was strangely comforting because it reminded me of normal life. I heated a cup of instant noodles and sat at the small table in the kitchen. There was only one chair, which felt lonely. As I ate, the wind outside picked up and I could hear the branches tapping against the roof. At first it sounded like a gentle patter, but then it got louder, almost like someone was drumming their fingertips on the ceiling. It made me look up. but I saw nothing. Just a plain ceiling with a single exposed bulb. After dinner, I cleaned up and returned to the living room. The only source of entertainment was a small TV that looked like it was from the early 90s. I tried turning it on, but nothing happened. No signal, no static. It was just a blank screen. So I had no choice but to either read a book I brought or flip through the diary. I decided to keep reading. The diary entries became more frantic. The writer talked about hearing whispers outside. They claimed they saw a figure near the tree line wearing dark clothing, moving slowly through the woods. One entry said, "I know I'm not alone here. I see it every night. Sometimes it stands near the window and looks at me." That made my skin crawl. I felt my heart pound a bit harder, and I kept glancing at the front windows. By the time I finished half the diary, it was getting late. I was tired, and I didn't want to freak myself out more. I went to the bedroom, changed into more comfortable clothes, and got under the covers. The bed still squeaked with every movement, which was annoying. I turned off the small lamp and tried to sleep. I couldn't. I heard the branches scraping the cabin outside. The wind was howling a bit. My mind raced with thoughts of the diary entries. I reminded myself that it was just a story in a notebook left behind by some nervous person. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The darkness in that bedroom felt thick, and every time I moved, the bed springs squealed. I eventually drifted off, but I woke up a few hours later. I lay there, eyes open, heart thudding. I listened. It was quiet for a few seconds, then I heard a faint creak on the wooden porch outside. It sounded exactly like someone stepping on an old board. I froze. I could feel my pulse in my temples. The wind had died down, so it wasn't the breeze. I waited, barely breathing, listening for more footsteps. Nothing. I sat up slowly, turned on the lamp, and looked around the small room. The window showed only blackness outside. I didn't see anything. My heart was beating so fast it made my chest feel tight. I decided not to check the porch. I told myself it was probably just the cabin settling, but part of me knew it sounded like footsteps. I tried to sleep again, and after a while my mind calmed down. The next morning the sun came through the window and everything seemed more normal. I felt a bit silly for getting scared. I made some coffee in the tiny kitchen, then stood on the porch to sip it. The trees looked the same as any other morning in a forest. The ground was damp from last night's rain, and the air felt cool. I breathed it in and tried to relax. I decided I'd explore the nearby trails. I grabbed a bottle of water, my phone, and locked up the cabin. As I walked along the trail, I noticed how dense the trees were. The path was well maintained, though, and I saw a few squirrels darting around. The sun was high, and the forest smelled of wet leaves and pine. It felt good to get moving and clear my head. I returned to the cabin in the late afternoon. My shoulders and legs were tired from hiking, and I felt hungry. Inside, the cabin air smelled stale again, like it never fully cleared out. I tried opening more windows. That's when I noticed the desk drawer was pulled open, and the diary was lying on top of the desk, flipped to a page in the middle. I was sure I had closed the drawer and left the diary stacked neatly with some other stuff I'd brought, but it was wide open, and the page had new wrinkles in it, as if someone had pressed down on it. My stomach churned. I walked closer and read the page it was open to. It mentioned strange marks on the windows, almost like smudges or handprints. It also said the writer heard a voice calling their name. I felt a chill crawl up my back. I glanced at the windows in the living room. They were dusty, but I didn't see any fresh marks. I checked each one. Nothing. Still, I couldn't explain why the diary was open. I stood there, my mind racing. Then I remembered I might have just left it that way. Maybe I forgot to close the drawer. I told myself I was just on edge. I spent the evening inside trying to stay calm. I read a bit, ate a sandwich, and listened to the wind pick up again. By nightfall, it got colder. I tried the cabin's heater, but it made a rattling noise that worried me, so I turned it off. The forecast said it wouldn't be too cold to sleep without it, so I put on another layer of clothing. Around 10 p.m., the lights flickered once and then stabilized. I had a flashlight next to me just in case the power went out. I sat in the living room reading more of the diary. The writer described hearing tapping on the walls late at night, like someone rapping their knuckles on the wood. The writer also mentioned faint knocking sounds on the front door. My heart jumped when I read that. It reminded me of the noise I heard on the porch the night before. I forced myself to keep reading. The next entry said the writer confronted whatever was outside. They flung the door open but saw nothing. Then they heard footsteps circling the cabin, moving quickly, and the writer locked themselves inside. I was gripping the diary so hard my knuckles were white. I felt sweat on my forehead. I decided that was enough reading for the night. I wanted to distract myself, so I started rummaging through the small cabinet in the kitchen. I found some old matches, a candle, and a half-used box of crackers. No interesting supplies for entertainment. I shut off the living room light and walked to the bedroom. As I passed the window near the front door, I thought I saw movement outside. I stopped. The porch light was on, casting a small, dim glow over the steps. For a second I could swear I saw a shadow move past the edge of the porch. My pulse sped up and my hands felt clammy. I took a deep breath and leaned closer to the window. Nothing was there. The trees were still. The yard was dark. No sign of anything. I hurried to the bedroom and shut the door behind me, even though that door had no lock. I clicked on the small lamp and tried to keep my eyes away from the window. My mind was racing. I started to panic about what I'd do if I heard something again. The diary's words kept echoing in my head. I reminded myself that there was no mention of actual harm happening. It was more about the terror of not knowing what was out there. I got under the covers, but I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept jumping to every noise. Then I heard a creak outside, like the one from the night before. My heart hammered. I stared at the bedroom door, waiting. Another creak. It sounded closer. I told myself to ignore it, but my body felt tense, and I was breathing faster. I reached for my phone to check if I had a signal. Barely one bar. I felt a sudden urge to call someone, but I knew it wouldn't go through reliably. Plus, what would I say? I'm hearing noises in the woods? That didn't seem like an emergency. I stayed there, eyes on the door, listening. The noise stopped. I waited for another few minutes, but it didn't continue. Finally, I turned off the light, sank back into the pillow, and waited for sleep. After a long while, I guess I drifted off. I woke up early. Sunlight was coming through the curtains. I felt relieved. I hopped out of bed, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside to check the porch. The old boards creaked under my weight. I saw nothing unusual, just damp leaves and some pine needles. No footprints, no marks, no signs of anyone else. I decided to spend most of the day out of the cabin. I drove into the nearest town to buy some food and clear my head. In the car, I felt safer. The road was empty, winding around dense forest. By the time I got to the small grocery store, the sky was clear and bright. I bought enough supplies for the rest of my stay, thinking I'd tough it out. When I came back to the cabin, it was late afternoon. I parked, walked up the porch, and noticed the door was slightly ajar. I always locked it. My stomach flipped. I pushed the door open. The living room looked the same at first glance, but the desk drawer was pulled out again, and the diary was on the floor. It was open, pages bent against the floorboards. My hands shook as I picked it up. I saw new writing scrawled on the margin of one page. It said, "Stop reading." It wasn't there before. The handwriting was the same style as the rest of the diary. My heart pounded so hard I felt lightheaded. I knew I didn't write that. Nobody else should have been here. I set the diary on the desk, took a few steps back, and scanned the room. Everything else seemed untouched. My bag was still in the corner. The small kitchen looked the same, minus a slight shift in the position of the single chair. I started breathing heavily, trying to think of a rational explanation. Maybe the caretaker came by and left a note, but why use the diary? And why say, "Stop reading"? I considered leaving right then, but part of me felt like I needed to stick it out, maybe confront whatever was happening. I was also curious, so I put my groceries away, double-checked the windows, and locked the door again. I even dragged a small chair under the doorknob to block it, in case someone tried to push it open. The evening wore on, and I kept glancing at the diary. I was afraid to read more. That note kept echoing in my mind. I tried to watch the sunset from the porch, thinking maybe the fresh air would calm me down. The forest got dark slowly, the orange light fading between the trees. Eventually, I went back inside. I sat at the desk, turned on the lamp, and opened the diary again. I skimmed through the next pages. The writer described hearing heavy breathing right outside the bedroom window at night. They said they felt like they were being watched constantly. One of the last entries said, "I can't leave, it won't let me. It's here, night after night. It knows I'm afraid." My entire body tensed. The hair on my arm stood up. That was the last written entry. But there was one blank page after it. Then a final page with those 3 words, "Stop reading." I shut the diary, feeling a wave of dread. Then I heard it. A knock on the front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. My heart slammed against my chest. I stood up so fast I almost knocked over the desk chair. The room was quiet again. I stared at the door. My hands were shaking. Another knock. My throat went dry. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but it stayed closed. I moved closer, one step at a time, my feet feeling like bricks. The knocks came again, slow and steady. I flicked on the porch light from the switch by the door. Through the small window in the door, I saw nothing but the porch. No figure, no shadow. I told myself to stay calm, but I was breathing hard. I decided to speak. "Hello? Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. Silence. I took a moment, then carefully unblocked the door by moving the chair. I had no weapon, but I felt I had to see what was out there. When I opened the door, the porch was empty. The forest beyond was dark. The wind made the branches sway, creating faint rustling sounds. I stepped onto the porch, my heart pounding in my ears. I looked around. Nobody stood on the porch or near the stairs. No movement except the trees. I backed inside and shut the door. I locked it again, then leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. My body felt tense and my mind was racing. I had no explanation for what was happening. I thought about the diary's warnings. I thought about leaving right away, but I was too shaken to drive at night on those winding roads. I also felt like if I ran, I'd just be giving in to whatever was messing with me. I turned off the lamp in the living room and sat in the dark for a while, listening for more sounds. The only things I heard were my own breathing and the occasional crack of the wood as the cabin settled. Eventually, I went to the bedroom, leaving the lights on in the hallway. I locked the bedroom door, even though I knew that wouldn't help much if someone really wanted in. I stayed awake, sitting on the bed, staring at the door. The cabin was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My thoughts were scattered. I pictured the previous occupant writing those entries, hearing the same noises, seeing the same weird signs. I wondered if they ever left. There was no mention of them leaving or anything else. Just that last warning to stop reading. At some point in the early morning, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, it was dawn. I felt stiff from sitting against the headboard all night. I walked into the living room and saw the diary lying on the desk. It was closed with no new messages. The front door was still locked. No sign of forced entry. I packed my things as fast as I could. I was done. My body felt shaky, and my nerves were frayed. I left the diary right where I found it, on the desk, in the same drawer. I didn't want to take it or destroy it. I just wanted to get away from that place. Before leaving, I stood on the porch for a moment, taking in the stillness of the morning. The forest looked calm, as if none of those events had happened, but I felt that lingering sense of being watched. I walked to my car, threw my bag in the back seat, started the engine, and drove off. I didn't look back. That's everything that happened. I still can't explain it. I try to convince myself it was just my imagination or maybe a prank. But the diary, the knocks on the door, the open drawer, and that warning scrawled in the margin, those things keep me up at night. I still feel like whatever was in those woods followed the same pattern described on those pages. And for the few nights I stayed there, those entries became my reality. I never saw a face, never found a person, and nothing physically harmed me. But the fear was real, and it sticks with me even now. I have no plans to go back. I froze the instant I saw the first masked figure. I was out on my usual night run, cutting through a narrow dirt trail behind my neighborhood. I liked running after dinner because the sidewalks were empty and the air felt cooler. That night the temperature was fine and the wind was calm. The moon was out, but not too bright. My legs felt strong, and my breathing was steady. I expected a normal run. I had no idea what I was about to see. I started at the corner of my street and followed the path that led past a few quiet houses, then curved into a patch of trees. I could hear my own footsteps on the pavement before I reached the dirt. There were a few streetlights at the entrance to the trail, but once I was in deeper, I relied on a small flashlight I carry for late-night runs. I don't like stumbling over roots or rocks, so I kept the light on and aimed at the ground ahead of me. After about 10 minutes, I heard a rustling sound in the brush. I assumed it was a raccoon or a stray cat, so I didn't slow down. But then I heard another noise. It sounded like branches snapping under someone's foot. I glanced to my left, thinking maybe someone else was out for a walk. I saw nothing. I kept running. I moved farther down the path, feeling my heart rate climb. Not from exhaustion, but from nerves. The trail isn't usually busy at night, and I began to feel uneasy. My flashlight beam caught something on a tree trunk. It looked like a strange mark. A symbol, maybe. It wasn't just a random scratch or a piece of graffiti. It looked deliberate. I took a quick look while I kept moving. It was shaped like two concentric circles with a single line crossing them, carved deep into the bark. My stomach tightened, and I felt the hairs on my arms rise. I tried to ignore it and kept going. A few seconds later, I saw another mark on a tree on my right. Same symbol, same careful carving. My mouth went dry. I wasn't sure why it bothered me so much, but it gave me a bad feeling. I kept jogging, telling myself these were just teenagers messing around. But then I felt like I was being watched. I can't explain it in detail. It was just a heavy sense that eyes were on me. I pointed my flashlight to the side again, scanning the trees. That's when I saw the first masked figure. He was standing by a thick tree trunk, maybe 20 feet away. He was tall, wearing some kind of dark hood or cloak. I couldn't see his face. The mask looked pale in the flashlight beam. It wasn't a mask with a design. It just looked like a blank white face, maybe plastic or porcelain. He didn't move. He just watched me. I stumbled over my own feet and almost fell. My pulse raced and my chest felt tight. I slowed down out of pure shock, but I didn't stop. My thoughts jumbled. I wanted to say something, but my throat closed up. Instead, I just kept running, picking up speed. My mind was screaming, telling me to get out of there. As I rounded a bend, I caught sight of another symbol carved into a tree, and then I saw another masked figure. This one was on the opposite side of the path, half hidden behind a cluster of bushes. I just saw the mask, that pale oval shape staring in my direction. My legs felt weak, but I pushed harder. I kept going, flashlight bobbing. My breath came out fast and shallow. The sound of my running shoes hitting the dirt got louder in my own ears, like my body was on high alert. I didn't hear any chase. No footsteps behind me. No frantic movement in the bushes. But I saw more of those symbols. They appeared on 3 more tree trunks, spaced out along the path. Each time I spotted one, I saw a figure nearby, partially hidden, with that same pale mask. They never approached me. They never called out. They just stood there watching. By the time I reached the end of the trail, my shirt was damp with sweat and my breathing was ragged. There's a short slope that leads back up to the suburban street, right at the edge of our neighborhood. When I got there, I paused for half a second and glanced back. My flashlight swept across the trees. I didn't see anyone. but my stomach churned like I was going to be sick. I turned off the flashlight because the streetlights in the neighborhood gave me enough light. I kept jogging until I reached my block. My house is in the middle of the street, a small one-story place with a simple porch and a single-car driveway. I sprinted the last stretch, feeling relief as I saw the glow of my porch light. I ran up the steps, unlocked the door, and got inside as fast as possible. My lungs burned and my chest felt heavy. My hands shook. I locked the door right away, sliding the deadbolt and the chain. Then I stood there in the entryway, panting, listening, expecting something to happen. The house was quiet. The clock in the living room ticked. I tried to calm down, leaning against the wall, wiping my forehead with the back of my hand. My mouth was still dry, and my legs felt weak. I kept replaying the sight of those masks in my head, those eyes behind them, that motionless stance. My heart pounded so hard it made my chest hurt. I stepped into the living room and looked out the front window, parting the curtains a little. My porch light illuminated the front yard, the sidewalk, and part of the street. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed a figure standing across the street, near a large tree on my neighbor's lawn. Another mask. It looked exactly the same as the ones in the woods. My gut twisted. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. The figure stood there for a few seconds. Then it seemed to move back into the darkness. I let the curtain drop. My hands were trembling. I didn't know if I should call the police. I wasn't sure what I'd say. I saw masked people in the woods, and one might be on my street. It felt like I was losing my mind, but I knew I had seen something real. My heart wouldn't slow down. I decided to check the back door. I went through the kitchen, making sure it was locked. I looked out the small window over the sink. Nothing. Just the fence and the neighbor's yard behind my place. I turned off most of the lights inside, keeping only a lamp on in the living room. I didn't want to stand out as a clear target through the windows. Then I stood in the dark of my hallway, listening. Every tiny noise made me jump. The refrigerator humming, the ice machine clicking, the pipes creaking. My mind was in overdrive. Eventually, I forced myself to sit on the couch. I tried to think if I'd offended anyone, or if I'd done something that would cause a group of people to harass me like this. But nothing came to mind. My life is pretty ordinary. I go to work, come home, run in the evenings, watch TV, and repeat. I don't have enemies. I don't have some big secret. So who the hell were these people? I got up and peeked out the window again. This time I didn't see anyone. The street was empty. My neighbor's house had their porch light on, but there was no movement anywhere. I caught my reflection in the glass. Sweaty hair, pale face, eyes wide. I felt a jolt of anxiety again, but I tried to breathe through it. I considered calling a friend, but it was late and I wasn't sure what to say. I double-checked that both doors were locked. Then I went to my bedroom and locked that door too, just in case. I kept a baseball bat under my bed. I took it out and leaned it against my nightstand. My heart was still pounding and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to sleep, but I stripped off my sweaty running clothes and put on shorts and a t-shirt. I grabbed my phone and laid in bed, scrolling aimlessly to distract myself. A couple of hours passed. I couldn't relax enough to sleep. My mind kept going back to those masked figures and the strange symbols. My body was still on edge. Each time I thought I heard something, I tensed up. Finally, at around 1 a.m, I felt my eyelids getting heavy. I set my phone aside and forced myself to close my eyes. Sometime later, I woke up to a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps on my driveway. My heart started pounding again. I grabbed my phone and noticed it was close to 3 a.m. I could feel my muscles tighten as I listened. The footsteps were slow. It wasn't the sound of someone just passing by on the sidewalk. I gripped my bat and got out of bed. My mouth was so dry that my tongue felt thick. The rest of my house was dark. The temperature felt a few degrees cooler, and I had a slight shiver. I crept to the front window in the living room, moving as quietly as possible. My blinds were closed, so I eased one slat open with my finger. I peered out. My driveway was dimly lit by the streetlight across the road. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed movement on the sidewalk near my mailbox. Another masked figure. This one wore a hood, just like the first one I saw in the woods. The white mask glowed faintly under the streetlight. He was looking at my house. I felt the urge to flick on the porch light and yell, but something told me that might not help. I stayed quiet, breath shallow. My forehead felt slick with cold sweat. He took a step forward, then stopped. He lifted his head slightly like he was scanning the front of my house. My heart hammered so loud that I thought he might hear it. After a few seconds, he backed away and vanished into the shadows beyond the streetlight's reach. My knees felt weak, and I almost dropped the bat. I forced myself to stand still for another moment. I didn't want to open the door or chase him off. That seemed stupid. What if there were more of them? My mind raced with questions. I felt a wave of nausea. Then I realized I couldn't just stand there. I had to do something. I reached for my phone thinking maybe I should call the cops. But then I hesitated. I wasn't sure if they would believe me. I could only say I saw suspicious people in masks. Is that enough? What if they're gone by the time a patrol car comes? I paced around my living room, gripping the bat. My hands felt clammy on the handle. My stomach was in knots. Every few minutes, I'd go back to the window, lift a slat, and check outside. I didn't see anyone anymore, but that didn't make me feel better. I felt watched. Around 4 in the morning, I heard another noise. This one came from the backyard. The fence squeaked a little when someone pushed on it. I froze, breathing hard. I turned off the lamp so I was in total darkness. I crept to the kitchen and peered out the window over the sink. I could barely see anything, just the outline of the fence and the dark shape of my neighbor's shed. I caught a slight motion near the fence line, but I couldn't be sure. I waited, my eyes straining. Suddenly, a face in a white mask appeared right in my line of sight. It was so close to the window that I jumped back and almost knocked over a chair. My heart hammered. I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming. The figure stood there, on the other side of the glass, looking in. I couldn't see any eyes or details behind that pale mask. It was like a blank face pressed against the window. I didn't move, and I could feel my muscles shaking. The figure tilted its head slightly. Then it drew back and vanished into the darkness. I stayed in that position for at least 30 seconds, bat in one hand, phone in the other. My mind was filled with panic. I didn't know how many of them were out there. I rushed to my bedroom, locked the door again, and stood against it. My hands were trembling so much I could hardly type, but I forced myself to dial 911. The operator's voice was calm. I tried to explain what was happening without sounding crazy. I said there were people in masks lurking around my property, looking in my windows. She told me to stay on the line, keep my doors locked, and wait for officers to arrive. I told her my address, and she said someone was on the way. I thanked her, hung up, and gripped my bat. I waited in the dark, leaning against my bedroom door, listening for sirens. I felt like time had slowed down. My heart was racing. My palms were slick with sweat. Every few seconds, I looked at my window, half expecting to see a mask peering in, but all I could see was the faint outline of the houses across the street. My ears were tuned to every creak of the house. Every shift of the wind outside made me flinch. About 10 minutes later, I saw the red and blue lights flashing against my walls. The police had arrived. I heard car doors slam, then footsteps on my porch. I walked to my front door, still gripping the bat, and called out to identify myself. An officer told me to open the door slowly. I did. 2 officers stood there, shining flashlights around my living room. Their presence made me feel some relief. They asked me to explain again. I told them everything, from the weird symbols in the woods to the masked figures outside my house. I showed them the window where one of them had appeared. They checked my backyard first. They shone their flashlights over the fence, around the bushes, and along the perimeter of my house. Then they walked around the front yard and up and down the sidewalk. They didn't find anyone. They didn't see any fresh footprints or obvious signs of forced entry. One officer suggested maybe it was a prank, Or maybe I was mistaken, but I could tell they believed I was scared. They took my statement, told me they'd have a patrol car swing by a few times during the rest of the night. After they left, I was still on edge, but having the police come out at least gave me some sense that I wasn't alone. I locked everything again. I sat in my living room until morning, too wired to sleep. I kept checking outside the window every few minutes. I didn't see anything else. No more movement, no more masked faces, but every noise made my heart jump. When dawn broke, I got dressed and went outside to look around in the daylight. The air felt cool, and the sky was getting brighter. I checked the sidewalk near my mailbox. I didn't see any footprints or dropped items. I walked to the side of my house where the backyard gate is located. It was shut, but not locked. I opened it and stepped into the yard. I noticed a few scuff marks in the dirt near the fence, like maybe someone had stood there or tried to climb it. There was no other sign of anything. I kept my guard up, feeling exposed out in the open. I thought about those symbols I'd seen on the trees in the woods. Part of me wanted to go back there in daylight and check them out, but the idea also made my stomach churn. I couldn't shake the image of those masked figures just standing there, silent, watching. I decided to wait. I went back inside, locked up, and brewed a pot of coffee. I sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee and staring at the backyard window. My hands were still shaky, and I didn't have much appetite. The rest of the day was a blur. I felt jumpy and exhausted. I tried to watch some random TV shows, but I couldn't focus. Every so often, I'd check outside the front window or peek into the backyard. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. The hours dragged. My phone rang a couple times, but it was just spam calls. I thought about telling a friend what happened, but I knew they'd think I was nuts or paranoid. That evening, I sat in my living room and kept the lights on. I tried to eat a sandwich, but my stomach kept fluttering, so I barely finished half. When it got dark, I felt my anxiety spike again. I decided I wasn't going to run that night. No way. I locked the doors and closed all the blinds. I made sure every window had a curtain drawn. Then I sat on my couch with the TV on low volume, just enough to distract me. I kept my bat by my side. I was afraid to look at the clock because I didn't want to see how slowly time was passing. Every minute felt like an hour. My legs twitched with leftover adrenaline. Around midnight, I heard a car drive by, but otherwise the street was quiet. No knocks on the door. No footsteps on the driveway. No glimpses of pale masks in the darkness. I told myself that maybe whoever it was had moved on. I tried to sleep on the couch, but it was uncomfortable. I shifted around for a while, then got up to grab a bottle of water from the kitchen. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I flicked on the kitchen light, took a drink, and leaned against the counter. My ears were tuned to every little noise. The dishwasher clicked. The fridge hummed. I heard the wind pick up outside. I walked to the small window again, feeling my heart race. When I pulled the curtain aside, the yard was empty. I saw only the fence, the neighbor's shed in the distance, and a few shadows cast by the porch light. Nothing else. I let the curtain drop and returned to the living room. After a while, I managed to doze off, gripping the bat in my right hand. That was the first night. Since then, I haven't gone back to that trail after dark. I've been checking my windows obsessively, especially at night. Sometimes I think I see a shape in the distance, but it might just be my nerves. The police have driven by a couple of times, but I don't have new evidence to give them. I don't know who those people were or what those symbols mean. All I know is that I'll never forget those blank white masks staring at me from the darkness, and I have no idea if they plan to return. For now, I'm keeping my doors locked and my eyes open. I'm not taking any chances. I pulled into the empty parking lot around 10:01 p.m. because the entire mall had just closed. The lot was huge and most of the floodlights were still on, but the place felt deserted. My plan was simple. Grab a quick item from one of those 24-hour stores attached to the mall entrance and then drive home. I had worked late and needed to pick up a replacement charging cable for my phone. I didn't expect anything weird. I thought I'd walk in, buy the cable, and head out. But from the moment I stepped out of my car, I knew something felt off. I looked around. All the other parking spaces were empty, except for a few scattered vehicles on the far side of the lot. The warm night air clung to my skin, and there was a faint smell of concrete dust. The tall parking lot lamps buzzed softly. Usually, I don't pay much attention to my surroundings, but I noticed how still it was. There were no people chatting, no footsteps echoing off the pavement, no security guard passing by. Just the quiet hum of electricity and my own breathing. I walked toward the mall entrance. A glass door was propped open, but the fluorescent lights inside were dim. I slipped in, bought my cable from a small electronics kiosk near the entrance, and left. I was in there for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing strange happened while I was inside. The cashier was half asleep, and the few people wandering around looked like they were only there for quick errands. No one talked much. I liked that because I was tired. I just wanted to go home and crash on my couch. When I came out, I noticed my shadow under the fluorescent lights near the doorway. It trailed behind me on the polished floor. I didn't think anything of it then. I just walked outside. I saw my car across the lot, standing under a row of overhead lamps. The corner of the lot was darker because some of those lamps were burnt out. Everything was bathed in yellowish light, except for that shadowy area near the edge. As I approached my car, I caught sight of my own shadow stretching out in front of me on the pavement. It looked normal at first. Then I moved my right arm to scratch the back of my neck, but my shadow's arm didn't move in sync. I stopped walking. My breath caught in my throat. I thought, maybe I was tired, or maybe the light angle was playing tricks. I lifted my foot off the ground, just a small motion, but the shadow didn't lift its foot at the same time. It lifted it a second later, like it was copying me with a slight delay. That was enough to make my hands shake. I turned in a slow circle, trying to see if another shadow or another light source might be interfering. But there was only one strong beam on me from overhead. My shadow was the only one visible on the ground. My head felt hot, and I could feel sweat collecting along my hairline. I put the shopping bag on the hood of my car and watched the shadow carefully. It stood there on the pavement, shaped exactly like me, but it didn't mirror my motions at the right time. I decided to test it again. I bent my knees, and I counted 1, 2, then the shadow bent its knees. I raised my hands, 1, 2, then it raised its hands. I felt a surge of panic. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but I had no other explanation. I muttered to myself, "This can't be happening." My heart pounded in my chest, and my arms felt cold despite the warm night air. I needed to get into my car and leave. That was my only thought. I grabbed the door handle on the driver's side, but the car was locked. My shadow stood on the pavement like a weird reflection that didn't want to cooperate. I pulled my keys from my pocket. My hand shook and I almost dropped them. I hit the unlock button on the key fob. The car lights flashed. I looked down. The shadow was still there, a few feet in front of me. It hadn't moved closer, but it wasn't matching my stance. I was standing straight, but it still looked slightly crouched, like it was lagging behind in a different position. I breathed in and out, then I opened the car door. The interior lights came on, illuminating the driver's seat. I climbed in and pulled the door shut. My pulse was racing so fast that I could hear a faint whoosh in my ears. My mouth felt dry. I stuck the key in the ignition, twisted it, and the engine turned over. The dashboard lit up, and the radio kicked on at a low volume. I pressed the door lock button. All I could think was, "Get out of here. Go. Don't look back." As I shifted into reverse, I glanced at the side mirror. I saw something dark flicker. I slammed on the brake and turned around to look through the rear window. My shadow was on the ground behind the car. The overhead lamp cast it there, but it seemed closer than before. I had no idea how that made sense. The angle of the light shouldn't have changed in that way. I felt my chest tighten and I could feel my heart beating against my ribs. I shifted again and started to back out slowly, expecting the wheels to bump over the curb or something. but the car rolled smoothly. I kept looking at the mirror. The shadow moved too, but the motion still had that delay, like it was separate. Each time I inched the car in reverse, the shadow seemed to move a moment later, as if it had its own timing. I needed more distance. I pressed the gas a bit harder. I got to the exit lane of the parking lot. I looked to the left and right. At this hour, there was barely any traffic. I turned onto the main road that looped around the mall. For a moment, I felt some relief. The bright streetlights overhead lined the road. I was moving away from that weird situation. I told myself everything would be fine if I just kept going. But after maybe 2 minutes, I noticed a flickering movement in the corner of my eye. I looked at the road behind me in the rearview mirror. It was hard to see anything except darkness. Still, I felt uneasy. I slowed down. Then I glanced to my left side mirror. Under one of the streetlights, I saw my shadow on the road's surface. But I could swear it was stretched out in an odd shape. It was as if it had followed me. I gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles popped. I didn't want to stop, but I felt a need to make sure I wasn't just imagining things. I pulled over to the side of the road near a small loading dock area behind the mall. The place was deserted except for a few big trash containers and a row of delivery truck bays. I turned off my engine, left the lights on, and stepped out of the car to check the situation. The overhead streetlight cast my shadow onto the pavement again. I forced myself to watch it. As I took 2 steps forward, the shadow took 1 step forward, then another. It didn't mirror my steps in real time. It had a weird pattern. My stomach felt heavy and my legs were tense. I started to walk in a small circle, just testing it. The shadow followed, but always with that lag. Or sometimes it moved a bit faster to catch up. I could almost feel my nerves tightening with each second. The back of my neck prickled like someone was standing right behind me. My breathing became short and shallow. I whispered, "What is this?" I had never felt so helpless. It's just a shadow, right? But it wasn't behaving like one. I decided to get back in my car and drive home. That was my plan. Just get home and lock the doors. I didn't care if I had to call someone to spend the night at my place. I didn't care if I had to drive an hour out of town. I wanted to be somewhere safe. I opened the driver's door again. That's when I noticed something in the reflection of the glass. The shadow was right behind me. It looked closer than before, as if it had closed the gap. I felt a jolt of fear in my gut. I slammed the door shut without getting in, spun around, and stepped away from the car. The shadow was near my feet, but it wasn't shaped exactly like me at that moment. It seemed to be turning its head slightly, even though I wasn't turning mine. I froze. My legs started trembling. I couldn't just stand there, so I ran back to the driver's side, yanked the door open, jumped in, and locked the doors again. My breathing was rough. I started the engine and backed out of that spot so fast the tires squealed on the pavement. I flicked on my high beams, even though it was a street with overhead lights. I just wanted more visibility. I sped toward the main exit of the mall complex. The roads leading out were mostly empty. A couple of cars passed by, but nobody seemed to notice my panic. I reached a traffic light and had to stop. I tapped my foot nervously on the brake pedal. I was afraid to look in the mirrors. I was worried I'd see the shadow behind the car again. Eventually, the light turned green and I hit the gas. I merged onto a larger road that led to the highway. My plan was to take the next on-ramp and head straight home. My chest still felt tight. My fingers tingled. My shoulders were sore from gripping the wheel so hard. I flicked my eyes from the windshield to the rearview mirror, then to the side mirrors. I saw normal shadows cast by my car's headlights. But I also noticed a shape under one of the street lamps behind me. It seemed to move in short jerks, as if it was trying to match my speed or keep me in sight. I told myself I was just paranoid, but I couldn't calm down. I decided to pull into a gas station that was still lit up and had a few vehicles around. I figured being around other people might help. I parked near one of the pumps and looked around. There was no clerk visible outside, but the station's store had its lights on. I could see a tall guy paying for something inside, and another person was in there browsing. At least it wasn't deserted. I got out of my car, feeling the cool night air against my sweaty skin. I kept glancing around for any sign of that shadow. I walked toward the store's entrance. The automatic doors opened with a hiss. The overhead lights inside were bright, and I heard music playing softly through the ceiling speakers. There was a slight smell of cleaning solution. I saw the tall guy leaving, so I just nodded at him. He walked by me without saying anything. I grabbed a cold bottle of water from the fridge and approached the cashier. He looked tired, probably bored out of his mind. I placed the bottle on the counter and tried to act normal, but my voice shook when I said, "How's it going?" He answered with a shrug. I paid and told him to keep the change. Then I turned around and headed outside. I paused right at the automatic doors, letting them slide open, then closed, then open again because I was looking for my shadow. It was on the pavement in front of me, under the station's bright lights, but it seemed the correct shape now. I lifted my left arm and the shadow did the same thing without any delay. I blinked, confused. My heart was still pounding, but for that moment, it appeared normal. I walked a few steps forward, watching the shadow move in perfect synchronization. My shoulders relaxed a bit and I drank some water. It was cold and tasted slightly metallic. Maybe the weird events were done. Maybe it was just a trick of the light back at the mall. I felt some relief, but I was still on edge. I got back in my car, started the engine, and pulled out of the gas station. I turned onto the highway ramp. The road ahead was empty. I merged into the right lane and accelerated. The lights along this stretch were spaced out, leaving patches of darkness between them. My headlights cut through the gloom, but the edges of the road were lost in shadows. After a few minutes, I found myself checking the mirrors again. I saw my shadow across the back seat, just from the overhead highway lights bleeding into the car. It looked normal, just like any driver's silhouette. Then a flicker of motion caught my eye in the rearview mirror. It looked like a shape shifting in the back seat. I twisted around in my seat to look directly. There was nothing there, just the empty back seat and the black windows. My pulse spiked again. I turned forward and gripped the wheel. "Calm down," I muttered to myself. "You're just scared." I pressed the accelerator, wanting to get home faster. The sign for my exit appeared. I put on my blinker, turned onto the off-ramp, and slowed as I approached the intersection. A single streetlight was on the corner. I waited for the red light to change. I glanced out the driver's side window. That's when I saw my shadow on the ground next to the car, as if it was standing outside, not attached to me. I could see it cast by the streetlight, but it didn't line up with my position inside the car. My breath caught again. I felt a rush of adrenaline surge through my body, making me grip the steering wheel even harder. The light turned green. I accelerated and took a left turn. My neighborhood wasn't far away. It was quiet at this hour. I passed dark houses and a few yards with chain-link fences. My house was at the end of a cul-de-sac. I pulled into my driveway, cut the engine, and sat there for a few seconds with the dome light on. My heart still pounded. I kept looking around the yard, the sidewalk, the bushes along my front fence. Nothing moved. I got out of the car carefully, half expecting that strange shadow to be waiting for me. The moon was out, but the main source of light was the street lamp near the corner of my lot. I could see my shadow on the ground, shaped like me, and it was doing exactly what I did. I moved my arm, it moved its arm in sync. I bent my knees. It followed. I felt a wave of relief, but it was mixed with lingering dread. I didn't trust it to stay that way. I walked to my front door, unlocked it, and slipped inside. I locked the door behind me, then turned on the hallway light. My living room was dark, but it was my familiar space. I took off my shoes and dropped my keys on the small wooden table by the door. I stepped into the living room and switched on a lamp. Everything looked normal. My couch, my TV, my kitchen counter in the back, with a few unwashed cups. The faint hum of the refrigerator sounded comforting. I decided to check my reflection in the living room window, just to see if the shadow was acting strange again. I saw my outline reflected against the dark yard outside. It matched my movements perfectly. I tried a few gestures, It followed. My heart rate finally started to slow down. I felt exhausted. My clothes clung to my body and my throat was parched again, so I went to the kitchen for another drink of water. I stood there, leaning against the counter, and chugged it straight from the bottle. A dull ache lingered in my chest from all the adrenaline. My limbs felt weak. I dried my mouth on the back of my hand. I decided to go to my bedroom and try to calm down. Maybe I'd watch something on TV or scroll through my phone until I fell asleep. But a part of me was still thinking about that delayed motion. It wasn't normal. Nothing about tonight was normal. I walked toward my bedroom. The hallway was dim, lit by a small nightlight I keep plugged into the wall. As I passed by the bathroom, I saw my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The overhead light in the hallway cast my silhouette into the mirror, but it looked normal. My reflection moved with me. I kept walking. My bedroom door was half open. I reached for the light switch inside the room and flicked it on. The overhead bulb blinked a few times, then stayed steady. I set my phone charging cable on the dresser. I glanced at the walls, the floor under the bed, just a quick check to make sure everything was in its place. Then I noticed my shadow on the wall near the dresser. The bedroom lamp was behind me, so I could see my shape on the wall. My arms were at my sides, but the shadow's arm seemed slightly outstretched, like it was reaching for something. I took a step forward. It took a step a fraction of a second later. My stomach twisted. I wanted to run outside, but I also felt too drained to keep running. I stood there, watching that shadow. I moved my right hand up. It matched me, but with a half-second lag. My skin broke out in goosebumps. My eyes started to water because I wasn't blinking. I forced myself to inhale and exhale slowly. I said out loud, "Leave me alone." My voice sounded shaky and a little silly, but I couldn't control that. The shadow stood on the wall. It didn't respond. I backed up and switched off the bedroom lamp. Darkness flooded the room. Then I flicked on the hallway light from inside my bedroom. The angle changed. Now the shadow spread across the floor instead of the wall. I watched it closely. It seemed normal for a few seconds. Then it shifted as if it was off by a few inches. I took 2 steps to the left. The shadow mimicked me, but with that unsettling delay. My breath quivered. My palms were sweaty. I realized I had goosebumps all over my arms and neck. This thing was following me everywhere, and I couldn't shake it off. But it hadn't hurt me. It just copied me in a delayed or strange way. I decided to close my eyes and pretend it wasn't there. I climbed into bed, fully dressed, and pulled the covers over my legs. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. My head hurt from stress. I took slow, deep breaths. Finally, I reached over and turned off the hallway light, plunging the entire house into darkness. No more shadow. No more weird reflections. Just me and my bed. My eyes stayed open for a long time, trying to spot any movement in the darkness. But I saw nothing. I heard only the hum of the fridge and the ticking of some pipes in the wall. I lay there, mind racing. I wanted to believe that I'd wake up the next morning and find everything back to normal, that my shadow would move in perfect unison like it's supposed to. I rubbed my forehead and pressed my eyes shut. My bed felt warm, and I shuddered a little from the tension. Eventually, my breathing slowed and my eyelids grew heavy. I drifted into a light sleep, half expecting to jerk awake at any sound. I don't know how long I slept, but sometime in the early morning, I woke up in a cold sweat. My t-shirt clung to my back, and the sheets felt damp. I didn't remember any dreams. I fumbled for my phone to check the time. It was almost 4 a.m. I lay there, listening. The house was quiet. I stared at the ceiling, trying to decide if I had the courage to flick the light on and check my shadow again. I stayed still for a few minutes, just breathing. Eventually, I sat up, slid out of bed, and turned on a small lamp. I looked around. My shadow was on the wall behind me, exactly how it should be. I lifted my arm. It lifted its arm at the same time. No delay. I let out a slow breath of relief. I lowered my arm. It lowered its arm. Perfectly synchronized. I felt tears of relief well up in my eyes, but I wiped them away quickly. I didn't want to start crying. I felt silly and drained. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while, just watching that shadow. It stayed in place, matching me perfectly. After everything that happened, I didn't trust it, but at least it looked normal. I got up and walked to the bathroom. The bathroom mirror showed me exactly what I expected to see. I looked tired, eyes bloodshot, hair messy. The mirror reflected me in real time. My shadow moved with me in the correct way. I splashed cold water on my face, patted it dry with a towel, and walked back to my bedroom. I shut off the lamp, got back into bed, and pulled the covers around me. My heart was still beating faster than normal, but I forced myself to breathe slowly and deeply. I concentrated on the softness of my pillow and the steady hum of the air conditioning vent. I couldn't forget what happened at the mall, though. The delayed movements, the sense that it was getting closer, that memory sent a chill across my skin. But as I lay there in the dark, I realized I felt safer in my house than I did out in that empty parking lot. My chest muscles loosened a bit. I stared into the darkness and reminded myself that right now, everything looked normal. I heard the faint buzz of my phone on the nightstand, probably a notification about some email or a random alert. I ignored it. My body was too tired to move. Slowly, my eyelids grew heavy again and I started to drift off into sleep. No more weird shadows, at least for now. At some point, the exhaustion took over completely and I slipped into a dreamless sleep. I didn't want to think about the events of the night anymore. I just needed rest. And finally, in the safety of my bed, I felt like I might get it, until morning, when I'd have to test my shadow again. But for now, I closed my eyes, listened to my heartbeat, and let darkness take me under.